When my son got married, I gave him the keys to a $2.5 million mansion in Buckhead. I never told him or his new wife that my company held the deed. Keeping that secret was the smartest business decision I made, because it did not take long for my daughter-in-law to show her true colors. She thought she could steal my legacy. Instead, she walked into a federal trap. Before I continue, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach a greedy relative a hard lesson. The sound of Vanessa shouting echoed off the marble countertops of the kitchen. I sat at the oversized island, taking a slow sip of my sweet tea. The condensation felt cool against my fingers. I kept my face blank as I watched my daughter-in-law pace across the floor. She clutched her phone like a weapon. "I do not care what the corporate office says," Vanessa screamed into the receiver. "We have been leasing this property for 2 years, and we are ready to buy. Tell Apex Legacy Holdings I am not taking no for an answer. Name your price. We want the deed by the end of the month." She paused, listening to the other end. Her face turned red. She slammed her hand down, knocking over a bowl of lemons. "Listen to me," she hissed. "My husband is about to launch a business venture. We need the equity from this house to secure loans. I am not letting some faceless corporate landlord stand in my way. Tell your boss we are prepared to make things difficult if they do not sell." She ended the call and threw the phone right onto the island. It stopped next to my glass. I did not flinch. I just watched her breathe heavily with frustration and greed. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Vanessa muttered, pacing again. "We live in an exclusive neighborhood in Atlanta. We should own this property. That stupid leasing company is ruining everything." I took another sip. What Vanessa did not know was that Apex Legacy Holdings was not a faceless corporation. It was me. I was the landlord. I owned the company and the deed to the house she was standing in. I owned it since the day it was built. 40 years ago, I started my medical supply business out of my car. I drove across Georgia selling bandages to rural clinics that big distributors ignored. I worked 16-hour days. I missed meals. I sacrificed my comfort so my son Marcus would never know poverty. I built a $40 million empire with my 2 hands. Apex Legacy Holdings was just one corporate entity I created to manage wealth. When Marcus proposed, I wanted them to have a good start. I let them move into this property under a corporate lease, paying a fraction of the market rate. I told Marcus it was a temporary arrangement until they found their own place. I never told him the rent he paid went straight into a trust fund for his future. I wanted to see how he and his wife handled responsibility before I handed over the keys. Now I had my answer. The kitchen doors swung open and Marcus walked in. He tossed his briefcase onto a chair. At 32, he looked like his father, tall and handsome, but with a softness that came from privilege. He had never had to hustle. He had never had to fight for survival. I made sure of that. Looking at him now, I wondered if making his life easy had been my greatest mistake. "What is going on?" Marcus asked, looking at the spilled lemons. "I could hear you yelling from the driveway." "It is that leasing company," Vanessa complained, rushing to wrap her arms around his neck. "They are refusing to sell us the house. The agent said the owner has no intention of putting the property on the market." Marcus sighed, running a hand over his face. "I am so sick of dealing with them. We have been paying rent for 2 years. We should have equity by now. My new business is going to need an injection of cash soon, and we cannot get a decent loan without collateral." "Well, we have to do something," Vanessa insisted. "My mother found a loophole online yesterday. She said if we can prove financial hardship, we might force a lease buyout or suspend our rent payments so we can save cash." I kept my face perfectly still, but my heart stopped beating. Financial hardship. My son, who never missed a meal in his life, was discussing committing fraud to avoid paying rent to a company he did not know I owned. "Are you sure that will work?" Marcus asked. He did not sound outraged. He sounded interested. "My mother says it works all the time," Vanessa replied eagerly. "People forge hardship claims to break leases every day. We just need to doctor a few bank statements. We can say your startup is draining our accounts and we are facing insolvency. It is just a white lie to get what we deserve. We live here. This house belongs to us in spirit. We just need the paper to prove it. I waited for Marcus to shut it down. I waited for the boy I raised to tell his wife that fraud was a felony. I waited for him to remember the values I tried to instill in him when we were living in a tiny apartment on the south side of town before the money came. Instead, Marcus nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "Let me call your mother tonight and see exactly what kind of paperwork we need to fabricate. We cannot keep throwing money away on rent. We need this house." The silence that followed was deafening. They stood there holding each other, dreaming about the wealth they were plotting to steal. They completely ignored me sitting at the island. To them, I was just Gloria, the retired mother who liked to bake peach cobbler and visit on Sunday afternoons. They thought my success was just luck. They thought my wealth was something they were entitled to simply by existing. I set my glass down. The sound made them both jump. They turned to look at me as if they had forgotten I was in the room.
"Are you all right?"
Mother Marcus asked, his voice suddenly dripping with fake concern.
"You are very quiet today."
"I am perfectly fine," I said smoothly. I stood up and smoothed the front of my slacks. "I was just thinking about how fast time flies. It feels like just yesterday you were a little boy asking for a larger allowance." Marcus laughed, clearly relieved that I had not caught on to their scheme.
"You know how it is, Mother. The cost of living keeps going up. We are just trying to make smart financial moves for our future."
"Smart financial moves," I repeated. The words tasted like ash. "Yes, you must always secure your future." I picked up my purse and walked toward the door. I did not yell. I did not confront them. I knew better than to show my hand to an enemy who thought they were smarter than me. In the corporate world, you do not win battles by shouting. You win by gathering intelligence, locking down your assets, and letting your opponents dig their own graves. "Have a wonderful evening," I told them. "I will see you both later." As I walked out to my car, my mind shifted into a gear I had not used since I retired. The mother in me was grieving. My son had chosen to align himself with a woman who wanted to steal my legacy through deception and fraud. He was willing to break the law because he felt entitled to the fruits of my labor. He betrayed me, not with a sudden attack, but with a casual willingness to cheat. But the CEO in me was wide awake and calculating. I got into my car and locked the doors. Vanessa thought she could force a faceless corporation to hand over a mansion. She had no idea she just declared war on the woman who owned her world. I walked into my home office and locked the heavy oak door behind me. My desk was a solid block of polished mahogany, a reward I bought myself after closing my first $1 million contract with the state hospital system. I sat down and opened my laptop. I needed to pull up the corporate lease agreement for this property and review every single clause. If Vanessa and Marcus thought they were going to play games with my company, I needed to make sure my legal fortress was impenetrable. I took a deep breath, letting the familiar quiet of the room calm my nerves. A soft knock broke my concentration. "Grandma, are you in there?" It was Trey Marcus's 19-year-old son from his first marriage. He was a sophomore at Georgia Tech studying cybersecurity. I paid his tuition in full every semester because I recognized his brilliant mind early on. He was tall and lanky, with sharp eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Right now, he looked exhausted and agitated. "Come in, Trey," I said. "What is going on?" "Vanessa changed the Wi-Fi password again," Trey said, stepping inside and closing the door. "She told me I use too much bandwidth and need to pay my own internet bill if I want to stay here for the summer. So I bypassed her router." "You hacked your stepmother's network?" "I prefer to call it an unauthorized security audit." Trey smirked, but the smile faded fast. "But Grandma, while I was routing around her admin privileges, I saw a shared folder on her desktop. It was not encrypted at all. She is incredibly careless. I opened it because I saw Dad's name on a file. you need to see this right now." Trey opened his laptop and set it on my mahogany desk. He brought up a series of financial documents and PDF files. "Explain it to me," I said, putting on my reading glasses. "Vanessa and her mother Roxanne are in massive trouble." Trey pointed to the screen. "Look at this ledger. Roxanne has been gambling on illegal offshore casino websites for 3 years. She owes $500,000. $500,000, I whispered. "Yes," Trey nodded grimly. "And the people she owes are not the kind who send polite collection letters to your house. They are shadow lenders, ruthless loan sharks. Look at this promissory note they signed 2 weeks ago." I leaned closer. The document was a loan agreement for $500,000 with an astronomical interest rate. But the absolute worst part was the collateral section. "They put up Marcus's retirement accounts," I said, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. "They forged his signature." "Exactly," Trey said. "Dad has a corporate retirement account and a private investment portfolio you helped him set up. Vanessa had all his account numbers. She and Roxanne pledged his entire life savings to secure this shadow loan to keep the loan sharks away from Roxanne. If they default, Dad loses everything he has ever saved in his entire life." "Does Marcus know anything about this?" I asked. "No way," Trey shook his head. "If Dad knew, he would have lost his mind completely. He thinks his retirement is locked down tight." I sat back in my chair. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with terrifying speed. The conversation I had just overheard in the kitchen made perfect sense now. Vanessa was not just greedy for a bigger house. She was utterly desperate. She and Roxanne had stolen Marcus's future to cover a gambling debt, and now the clock was ticking loudly. "That is why they need the house," I said out loud, piecing it together. "What do you mean?" Trey asked. "I heard Vanessa and your father talking in the kitchen just 10 minutes ago. Vanessa was screaming at a real estate agent. She is trying to force the corporate landlord to sell them this mansion. They want to claim financial hardship to break the lease or force a buyout." Trey's eyes went wide with realization. "They want the equity from the house. If they can somehow acquire this house or get a massive payout from a lawsuit, they can pay off the shadow loan before the sharks come to collect and before Dad realizes his retirement accounts are completely frozen. They are trying to steal my property to cover their crimes," I said. My voice was dangerously calm. In the medical supply business, I faced down corrupt hospital administrators and cutthroat competitors. I never let anyone steal a single dime from me. My own daughter-in-law thought she could rob me blind right under my nose. Grandma Trey said softly, "There is more." He clicked to another file on the screen. "This is an email exchange between Vanessa and Roxanne from yesterday afternoon. Roxanne told Vanessa that the shadow lenders are getting very impatient. They gave them a strict 30-day deadline. Roxanne told Vanessa she needs to accelerate the plan immediately. They are talking about finding a way to take control of family assets directly." "Which family assets?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. Trey hesitated, looking uncomfortable. "Yours? Roxanne wrote that you are getting older. She suggested Vanessa start monitoring your mail and your banking. She thinks you have millions just sitting in liquid cash, ready to be taken." They were circling me like vultures. They thought because I spent my days gardening and baking peach cobbler that my mind had gone soft. They had no idea I still woke up at 5 in the morning to read complex financial reports just to keep my mind sharp. "Trey," I said, looking at my brilliant grandson, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. You cannot let Vanessa know you saw any of this. You must act completely normal. Can you do that?" "Yes, Grandma," Trey said firmly. "But what are we going to do? If they default, Dad is completely ruined. If they try to come after you, they could forge your signature too. Your father made his bed when he chose to ignore his wife's toxic behavior," I said. "I will not let him be destroyed financially, but I will not rescue him without teaching him a lesson he will never forget. As for Vanessa and Roxanne, they have crossed a line they cannot uncross. We are going to let them proceed with their plan. Let them proceed? Trey gasped. Are you crazy? I did not build a $40 million empire by acting crazy, I replied. I built it by letting my enemies expose themselves completely before I struck. If we confront them now, they will deny it. They will destroy the digital evidence. We need them to take action. We need them to commit to their fraud on paper in front of witnesses. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the estate. Trey, I need you to create a secure backup of all these files. Put them on an encrypted flash drive and hand it directly to me. Leave no trace on her network that you were ever there. Done, Trey said. I already routed my connection through a secure proxy. She will never know I was inside her system. Good, I said. Next, I need you to keep monitoring their communications. If they mention any specific bank forms, medical documents, or legal filings, I need to know immediately. Grandma, they are playing a very dangerous game. Those shadow lenders are serious criminals. So am I when someone threatens my family and my legacy, I said. Vanessa thinks she is a mastermind because she can forge a signature. I survived the corporate world as a black woman in the 1980s. I know how to play chess while they are playing checkers. Trey smiled a sharp, brilliant smile. I am glad I am on your side, Grandma. You are on the winning side, Trey. Now go back to your room and complain loudly about the internet being down. Make Vanessa feel powerful. Let her think she is in control. We want her confident and very secure. Trey nodded, closed his laptop, and quietly slipped out of the office. I locked the heavy door behind him and quickly opened my desk drawer, pulling out my specialized corporate vanishing ink pen for tomorrow. Let them try. I arrived at the Piedmont Country Club right at noon. The valet took the keys to my Lincoln, and I adjusted my silk blazer before walking up the wide stone steps. The Atlanta heat was already unforgiving, but the air inside the club was perfectly chilled. The hostess led me to a private table by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the golf course. Vanessa and her mother Roxanne were already there. They were sipping sparkling water with lemon and wearing matching expressions of exaggerated delight when they saw me approach. "Gloria, you look absolutely stunning," Roxanne said, standing up to give me a hug that felt entirely too tight. She smelled of expensive perfume and cheap desperation. Vanessa leaned over the table to kiss my cheek. "Thank you so much for meeting us, Mom. We know how busy you are with your garden and your charity boards." I smiled warmly and took my seat. "I am never too busy for family," I said. The word family tasted sour, but I swallowed it down with a sip of ice water. The waiter arrived, and Roxanne immediately ordered a bottle of their most expensive champagne. She insisted we needed to celebrate. I watched her perfectly manicured hands flutter as she talked. Roxanne was a woman who had spent her entire life surviving on the wealth of others. She married rich, divorced rich, and gambled away every settlement she ever received. Now she was trying to use my son as her final payout. When the plates were cleared and the second glass of champagne was poured, the atmosphere shifted. Roxanne cleared her throat and gave Vanessa a pointed look. The trap was being set. "Gloria, we actually wanted to talk to you about Marcus." Roxanne began leaning forward and resting her arms on the crisp white tablecloth. "He is doing so well with his new startup concepts. We are just so proud of him." "I am always proud of my son," I replied, keeping my voice light and encouraging. Vanessa chimed in right on cue. "He is working so hard, Mom. He has some major investors lined up for his new logistics software, but you know how slow the banks can be with all their red tape. They are requiring a mountain of paperwork just to open the initial commercial accounts." Roxanne reached into her oversized designer tote bag and pulled out a sleek leather portfolio. She opened it and slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward me. "It is really just a formality," Roxanne said, waving her hand dismissively. "The bank needs a standard tax form and a character reference from a direct family member to clear the anti-money laundering checks. They just need to verify his familial financial standing. Marcus was going to bring it to you this weekend, but I told him we were having lunch anyway, so I would just save him the trip. I looked down at the paper. Then I looked at Vanessa. She was holding her breath. Her eyes were fixed on the document. She was trying to look casual, but her posture was rigid. "Oh, a tax form," I said softly. I reached into my purse and pulled out my reading glasses. I slid them onto my face and picked up the paper. My eyes scanned the dense legal text. I recognized the specific watermarks of a major federal banking institution. I saw the Uniform Commercial Code clauses hidden in the fine print. I noticed the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation insignias at the bottom margin. This was not a character reference. It was a guarantor agreement for a $2 million commercial loan. They had structured it brilliantly. The document explicitly listed Apex Legacy Holdings, LLC, as the primary guarantor. They had done their homework well enough to find out the name of the company that owned the Buckhead mansion, but they still had no idea I was the sole managing member of that entity. They thought they were tricking a clueless grandmother into signing over her personal liability. What they were actually doing was attempting to bind a corporate entity to a massive shadow debt. If I signed this paper, I would be legally putting up my company assets as collateral for their $2 million payout. They plan to take this document to the bank, forge the necessary corporate seals, and walk away with a mountain of cash to pay off Roxanne's loan sharks. "This looks very complicated," I said, putting a note of confusion into my voice. I tapped the paper with my manicured fingernail. Marcus never mentioned he needed me to sign anything for the bank. "Are you sure this is just a character reference?" Vanessa laughed, a high-pitched, nervous sound. "Oh, Mom, you know bank lawyers. They make everything sound so intimidating. It is literally just verifying that you are his mother and that he comes from a reputable family. You do not even have to read all that fine print. It is standard boilerplate garbage. We just want to help Marcus succeed," Roxanne added, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "He is so stressed about getting this business off the ground. If you sign it today, we can drop it off at the bank branch this afternoon and surprise him with the approved accounts tonight." "Well, we certainly want to help Marcus succeed," I said warmly. I reached into my purse. My fingers brushed past my standard ballpoint pens and found the specialized silver pen I had packed specifically for this occasion. I had purchased it years ago after attending a high-level corporate fraud prevention seminar. It was a vanishing ink pen. The ink flowed perfectly black and looked exactly like standard archival ink, but within 48 hours it completely evaporated, leaving the paper totally blank. I uncapped the silver pen. I looked down at the signature line. Below the line, printed in bold letters, was the name of my company, Apex Legacy Holdings, LLC. I smiled and pressed the pen to the paper. I signed my name with slow, deliberate strokes. I made sure my signature was large and perfectly legible. I signed away $2 million of imaginary liability. "There we go," I said, capping the pen and sliding the document back across the table. "I hope this helps him get exactly what he needs." Roxanne snatched the paper off the table with a speed that almost made me laugh. She stared at my signature, and a look of pure, unadulterated triumph flashed across her face. She quickly tucked the document back into her leather portfolio and snapped it shut. "Thank you, Gloria," Roxanne said, her voice shaking slightly with adrenaline. "You have no idea how much this helps." "Oh, I think I have a very good idea," I replied, taking my reading glasses off and dropping them back into my purse. Vanessa let out a massive breath and slumped back in her chair. The tension left her body instantly. She picked up her champagne glass and took a huge gulp. "You are the best mother-in-law in the world," she said, beaming at me. "Marcus is going to be so thrilled." "I am sure he will be," I agreed. But they were absolute fools. They did not understand the legal gravity of what they had just done. By taking that document with the intention of submitting it to a federally insured bank, they were stepping out of the realm of simple family manipulation. The moment they handed that forged corporate guarantee to a loan officer, they would be committing a Class A federal felony. They were about to cross state lines and utilize wire transfers based on fraudulent corporate backing. They were walking straight into a federal wire fraud trap, and I was the one holding the door open for them. I finished my dessert and politely declined coffee. I told them I needed to get back to my garden. We hugged our fake hugs and kissed the air next to each other's cheeks. "Thank you again for lunch, ladies," I said, standing up. "Good luck with the bank this afternoon. We will take care of everything Roxanne promised," patting her leather bag. "Grandma, did they do it?" Trey asked, his voice tight with anticipation. "They took the bait, Trey," I said, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. "They have the document and they are heading to the bank today." Trey let out a low whistle. "The ink will vanish by Saturday. The bank will have a blank signature line on a $2 million application and a digital record of them submitting it." "Exactly," I said. "But we are not going to stop there. I need you to keep monitoring the house cameras. They are going to realize the bank requires a cognitive competency sign-off for guarantors over the age of 65. When they hit that roadblock, they are going to panic and come for me directly. I will watch everything, Grandma," Trey promised. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my private suite on the east wing of the Buckhead mansion. I designed this sanctuary myself 10 years ago. It was an elegant space filled with towering bookcases, lush cream rugs, and absolute silence. In the corporate world, silence is a luxury. When you spend 40 years building a medical supply empire from the trunk of a used car, you learn to appreciate the moments when nobody is asking you for money. I sat in my velvet armchair, reading a quarterly earnings report from my holding company. I was perfectly calm. The vanishing ink on the guarantor agreement was currently doing its job, and I knew Vanessa and Roxanne were completely unaware of the federal trap they had just stepped into. A sharp knock on my suite door broke the quiet. Before I could answer, the door swung open and Trey slipped inside. He locked the heavy door behind him and leaned against it. He was breathing fast, and his eyes were wide with a mixture of anger and panic. He held his laptop tightly against his chest. "Grandma, we have a massive problem," Trey said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just intercepted an email between Vanessa and the loan officer at the bank. The bank kicked back the guarantor agreement you signed yesterday." "No," Trey said, walking over and setting his laptop on my glass coffee table. "The loan officer accepted the document, but their compliance department flagged your age. Because you are over 65, the bank requires a cognitive competency sign-off. It is a standard anti-fraud measure. They need a licensed medical professional to certify that you are of sound mind and fully understand the financial liability of a $2 million loan." Trey opened his laptop and pulled up a live feed from the security camera in the main kitchen downstairs. "That is the terrifying part, Grandma," Vanessa panicked. She called Roxanne, crying about how the shadow lenders are going to break their legs if they do not get the deed to this house by Friday. Roxanne told her to calm down and said she had a contact who could fix the medical form. "A concierge doctor who owes her a favor. They are bringing him here today. Right now, actually. But it gets worse," Trey said. His hands were actually shaking as he clicked to another video file. "I caught this on the pantry camera 10 minutes ago. Look at what she is doing." The video played. It showed Vanessa standing near the stove, holding a steaming mug of my favorite chamomile tea. She looked over her shoulder to make sure the room was empty. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small glass vial with a rubber stopper. She used a dropper to extract a thick, clear liquid. She squeezed 5 heavy drops into the chamomile tea and quickly stirred it with a spoon. "I checked her browser history from last night," Trey replied, his voice thick with disgust. "She spent 3 hours researching heavy animal sedatives. She bought liquid asapromazine from a shady online veterinary supply store. It is a tranquilizer used for horses and large dogs. Grandma It is designed to cause extreme lethargy, confusion, and disorientation. She is planning to drug you before the corrupt doctor gets here. Do not call the police, Trey, I said, my voice steady and commanding. Erase your digital tracks and go back to your room. Lock your door and stay out of sight. Grandma, you cannot drink that tea, Trey pleaded. It could stop your heart. I have absolutely no intention of drinking it, I replied, standing up and smoothing my emerald green blazer. But I am going to let her serve it to me. I am going to let her bring that doctor in here, and I am going to give them exactly the performance they are hoping for. Now go. I walked over to the massive potted monstera plant sitting in the corner of my suite. The soil was deep and dry. It was the perfect disposal site. I sat back down in my velvet chair, picked up a fashion magazine, and waited. The door opened, and Vanessa stepped inside. She was carrying a silver tray holding a beautiful ceramic mug. A thick plume of steam rose from the tea, carrying the sweet scent of chamomile and honey. Right behind her walked a man in a cheap, wrinkled suit, carrying a leather medical bag. He had slicked back hair and shifty eyes. He did not look like a medical professional. He looked like a man who sold fake prescriptions out of a motel room. "This is Dr. Vance," Vanessa lied smoothly. "Marcus and I noticed you have been seeming a bit tired lately. You have been forgetting little things. We just wanted a professional to stop by and do a quick wellness check. It is just a routine physical for the bank paperwork. Nothing to worry about." I reached out and took the warm mug from the silver tray. I looked down at the amber liquid. I knew it was laced with enough animal tranquilizer to sedate a mastiff. I brought the rim of the mug to my lips and pretended to take a long, deep sip. I let the hot liquid touch my bottom lip, but I kept my teeth firmly closed, tightly sealing my mouth. I lowered the mug and sighed, as if the tea was perfectly soothing. I held the mug in my hands. "Oh, Vanessa," I said, pointing toward the hallway. "I think I left my reading glasses on the console table outside. Could you be a dear and grab them for me? I cannot read the doctor's name tag without them." Vanessa frowned, clearly annoyed by the delay, but she turned her back and stepped out into the hallway. The corrupt doctor turned to look at a painting on my wall. In that split second of distraction, I leaned over and poured the entire contents of the mug directly into the dry soil of the potted monstera plant. The dark earth absorbed the poisoned tea instantly, leaving no trace. I sat back in my chair and placed the empty mug on the side table, just as Vanessa walked back into the room, holding my spare reading glasses. Vanessa looked at the empty mug, and a gleam of pure triumph flashed across her face. She stepped back and nodded to the doctor. He opened his leather bag and pulled out a clipboard. "Well, Mrs. Morrison," the doctor began, his voice oily and rehearsed, "I am just going to ask you a few very simple questions to test your memory and cognitive function. Can you tell me what year it is?" I waited a few seconds. I let my eyelids droop slightly. I slouched my shoulders, making my posture look weak and suddenly frail. I looked at the doctor with an expression of deep, vacant confusion. "The year?" I mumbled, intentionally slurring my words. "Well, it must be 1998. Marcus just started high school." "I see," the doctor said, making a heavy checkmark on his clipboard. "Can you tell me who the President of the United States is right now?" The doctor pulled a blank piece of paper from his bag and handed me a pen. "I need you to draw the face of a clock, Mrs. Morrison. Put the numbers in the correct order and set the hands to 10 past 11. I took the pen with trembling fingers. I let my hand shake violently as I pressed the tip to the paper. I drew a jagged, lopsided circle. I scribbled random numbers outside the lines, placing a 7 where the 12 should be. I drew erratic lines that looked like the work of a severely impaired mind. I handed the paper back to him and let my head loll against the back of the chair. I closed my eyes, pretending the heavy animal sedatives were pulling me into a deep, dark sleep. Dr. Vance looked at the paper, then looked at Vanessa. He gave her a sharp, confirming nod. "It is advanced cognitive decline," he said, his voice totally devoid of genuine medical concern. "She is completely disoriented and unaware of her surroundings. She lacks the legal capacity to manage her own finances or sign legally binding documents. I will sign the declaration of incompetence right now." "Oh, my poor mother-in-law," Vanessa fake cried, wiping a non-existent tear from her cheek. "Thank you, doctor. My husband and I will need this document immediately so we can file for emergency power of attorney. We have to take over her estate to protect her from herself." The doctor scribbled his signature on the official medical form, handed the clipboard to Vanessa, and packed up his bag. They walked out of my suite, closing the door quietly behind them. The skyline of downtown Atlanta shimmered in the relentless afternoon sun. I sat in the back of a blacked-out luxury SUV parked across the street from a sleek glass building. Next to me sat a man named Miller. He was a high-end private investigator I had kept on retainer for the past 15 years. In my line of work, you always needed someone who knew how to find the truth quietly. Right now, Miller was adjusting a high-powered telephoto lens attached to a digital camera. The lens was pointed directly at the fourth-floor corner office of the building across the street. That office belonged to a probate attorney Vanessa had hired. "Are you sure you want to watch this?" Gloria Miller asked, his voice rough but gentle. "It is not going to be pretty." "I need to see it with my own eyes," I replied. I kept my posture straight and my hands folded in my lap. I cannot make my next move based on assumptions. I need to know exactly how far my son is willing to go. Miller nodded and tapped the screen of the tablet resting on the center console. The live feed from the camera appeared, displaying the interior of the law office in crisp, high definition. Through the large glass windows, I could see the polished mahogany conference table. 10 minutes later, the heavy glass doors of the conference room swung open. Vanessa marched in first, wearing a designer dress paid for by the credit cards she was drowning in. Roxanne followed closely behind her, carrying a large leather tote bag. And then came Marcus. My son walked into the room looking nervous but determined. He was clutching a thick manila envelope. I knew exactly what was inside that envelope. It was the fraudulent medical document signed by the corrupt doctor just a few hours ago, declaring me legally incompetent. The probate attorney, a man in a sharp blue suit, stood up and shook their hands. They all took their seats around the table. My heart beat with a slow, steady rhythm. A part of me, the mother who had rocked Marcus to sleep and bandaged his scraped knees, was still hoping he would change his mind. I was hoping he would drop the envelope on the table and tell his wife that stealing his mother's freedom was a line he would never cross. I watched the screen closely, holding my breath. Vanessa leaned forward and spoke animatedly to the attorney. She pointed to the envelope. Marcus slowly slid it across the table. The attorney opened it and read the fake medical declaration. He nodded solemnly, adjusting his glasses. He pulled a thick stack of legal documents from his briefcase and laid them out in front of Marcus. "What are those forms?" I asked Miller, keeping my eyes glued to the tablet screen. Miller zoomed the lens in, focusing on the top of the pages. "That is a petition for emergency power of attorney," he said grimly. "If he signs that, he is legally requesting full control over your medical decisions, your bank accounts, your properties, and your entire estate. He is telling the state of Georgia that you are effectively a ghost." I watched my son pick up a heavy gold pen. He stared at the documents for a long moment. Vanessa placed her hand on his shoulder, whispering something in his ear. Roxanne smiled that toxic, supportive smile. Marcus did not throw the pen down. He did not stand up and walk away. He pressed the pen to the paper and signed his name. He signed the first page. Then he flipped to the second page and signed again. He initialed the margins. He legally swore under penalty of perjury that his mother was a broken, mindless woman who needed to be stripped of her civil rights. He sold my freedom for a house. A single tear escaped my eye and rolled down my cheek. I did not wipe it away. I let it fall. That tear was the very last piece of maternal weakness leaving my body. When it hit the fabric of my emerald green blazer, the mother in me died completely. The woman who remained was the ruthless chief executive officer who had built a $40 million empire from nothing. Marcus had made his choice. Now he would have to survive mine. "They are shaking hands," Miller said, his voice quiet. "The attorney is stamping the petition. They are going to file it with the county courthouse electronically. It should be in the system within the hour." I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I dialed the private number of my lead corporate attorney, Richard Hayes. Richard was a shark in a custom suit. He had defended my company against hostile takeovers and frivolous lawsuits for 2 decades. "Richard," I said when he answered on the second ring, "the fraudulent petition for emergency power of attorney has just been signed and filed by my son. I am looking at the court notification right now," Gloria Richard replied, his voice crackling with professional energy. "The probate court just flagged it in the system. They are moving incredibly fast. They must have bribed a clerk to expedite the filing. Let them move fast," I instructed. "I want you to execute the containment protocol we discussed this morning." "Understood," Richard said. "My team is filing the digital injunctions as we speak. We are creating an impenetrable legal firewall around Apex Legacy Holdings, LLC, and all of your private investment portfolios. We are presenting the judge with your updated rock-solid medical competency evaluations from the top neurologists in the state. The judge will immediately block this fraudulent power of attorney from touching a single dime of your corporate wealth or your liquid assets. Make absolutely sure the block is silent," I commanded. "Do not alert their probate attorney. Do not send a rejection notice to Vanessa or Marcus. I want them to believe they have full control. I want them to think they have the keys to the kingdom." Richard chuckled a dark, knowing sound. "We will isolate the trap perfectly, Gloria. The only asset we will leave exposed to their fake power of attorney is the deed to the Buckhead mansion. They will be able to transfer the title of the house, but nothing else." By isolating the trap, I was guiding them down a very specific legal hallway. Vanessa and Roxanne needed the mansion to secure their fraudulent bank loan and pay off the shadow lenders. If they realized their power of attorney was useless, they might panic and run. I needed them to feel victorious. I needed them to walk into the federal bank tomorrow morning holding that forged guarantor agreement, thinking they had the legal authority to sign on my behalf. Once they sign that bank loan and wire the money across state lines, the trap snaps shut, Richard confirmed. Federal wire fraud, bank fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. They are looking at decades in federal prison. "Make sure the bank is ready," I said. "The regional director of the bank is a personal friend of mine," Richard replied. "I have already briefed him on the situation. His compliance team is standing by. They will process the loan and approve the wire transfer to Roxanne's shadow lenders offshore. The money will move, confirming the federal crime. But the FBI will be waiting to intercept the funds before they actually clear the international accounts." "Thank you, Richard," I said. "I will speak to you tomorrow." I ended the call and looked back at the tablet screen. Vanessa, Marcus, and Roxanne were walking out of the law office. They were laughing. Vanessa hugged Marcus tightly, kissing his cheek. Roxanne was already texting someone on her phone, probably the shadow lenders, telling them the money was finally secured. "Take me home, Miller," I said, turning off the tablet screen and handing it back to the investigator. "I have a party to prepare for." Miller started the engine of the SUV and pulled out into the busy Atlanta traffic. I sat in the back seat watching the city roll by. I thought about the sheer audacity of my daughter-in-law. She thought she could outsmart me because I was an older woman. She thought my age made me vulnerable. Vanessa wanted to play the game of wealth and power. Tomorrow morning, she would get her chance. She would walk into a federal bank and sign her own death warrant. And a few days from now, she would throw a massive celebration to show off her stolen prize. I was going to let her have her moment in the sun. I was going to let her stand in front of all her high society friends and bask in the glory of her fake success. And then I was going to burn her entire world to the ground. The sun rose over Atlanta the next morning, painting the city in shades of pale gold. I was already sitting at my mahogany desk, sipping a fresh cup of black coffee. I had not slept much, but I did not feel tired. Adrenaline is a far better stimulant than caffeine. My phone chimed precisely at 9 o'clock. It was Richard. They just walked through the brass revolving doors of the First Federal Bank of Atlanta, Richard said, his voice tight with anticipation. Miller is parked across the street, monitoring their exit. My contact inside the bank is running the closing table personally. Who is there? I asked. Vanessa and Roxanne, Richard confirmed. Marcus did not show up. He probably went to his office to play the role of the hard-working entrepreneur while his wife commits a federal crime on his behalf. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Typical. Marcus was always happy to reap the rewards of dirty work, as long as he did not have to get his own hands muddy. Tell your contact to proceed, I instructed. Let them hang themselves. I opened my laptop and logged into the secure portal Richard had set up for me. His contact at the bank, a senior regional director named Harrison, was wearing a discreet audio transmitter. I could hear the muffled sounds of the bank lobby, the clinking of heels on marble floors, and then the smooth, practiced voice of the director greeting my daughter-in-law. Mrs. Morrison and Miss Vance, right this way, please, Harrison said smoothly. We have the closing room prepared for you. I listened as the heavy glass door of the conference room clicked shut. The audio feed became crystal clear. Vanessa sounded breathless, giddy with the thrill of the heist. Thank you so much for accommodating us on such short notice, Vanessa said, laying on her thickest fake Southern charm. My mother-in-law's sudden medical decline has been absolutely devastating for our family. We are just trying to secure the estate's assets so we can afford her round-the-clock medical care. I understand completely, Mrs. Morrison Harrison replied, playing his part perfectly. I have reviewed the emergency power of attorney you filed yesterday. Everything appears to be in order. The court stamp is verified. You are legally authorized to act as the financial proxy for Gloria Morrison. Now Harrison continued shifting some papers. We are looking at a $2 million commercial mortgage against the property located in Buckhead, currently deeded under Apex Legacy Holdings, LLC. Is that correct? Yes, Vanessa said quickly. We need to liquidate a portion of the property's equity immediately to cover some outstanding medical debts and family obligations. And the guarantor agreement? Harrison asked. Roxanne chimed in, her voice dripping with fake sophistication. We have the original document right here. Gloria signed it yesterday during a brief moment of lucidity before her condition worsened. Harrison shuffled the papers. Excellent. I just need you to sign these final closing disclosures, Vanessa. By signing these, you are legally executing the loan on behalf of the corporate entity and authorizing the disbursement of the $2 million. All finished, Vanessa said, her voice trembling with excitement. Perfect, Harrison said, typing on his keyboard. Now, regarding the disbursement of the funds, how would you like the $2 million routed? We have specific wire instructions, Roxanne interrupted eagerly. We need $500,000 wired immediately to an overseas holding account to settle a private debt. The remaining $1.5 million can be deposited directly into Marcus and Vanessa's joint checking account. She read off the routing numbers. I wrote them down on a notepad on my desk. The numbers corresponded to an offshore bank in the Cayman Islands. Roxanne was directing federally insured funds out of the country to pay off her illegal gambling debts to shadow lenders. I am initiating the wire transfer now, Harrison said. The clicking of his keyboard echoed through the audio feed. Every single keystroke was a nail in their coffins. The transfer has been authorized, Harrison announced. The funds are currently processing. You should see the remaining balance in your joint account within 24 hours. I heard Vanessa let out a massive breath. "Oh, thank God," she whispered. "Thank you so much for your help, Harrison," Roxanne said, her voice thick with relief. "We truly appreciate it." "We are always happy to help our valued clients," Harrison replied smoothly. I listened as the chairs scraped against the floor and the door opened. Vanessa and Roxanne walked out of the conference room. They were laughing quietly, practically skipping out of the bank. They thought they had just pulled off the heist of the century. They thought they had successfully stolen $2 million from a defenseless old woman. I ended the audio feed and immediately dialed Richard. "It is done," Gloria Richard said, his voice thrumming with adrenaline. The wire was initiated. They officially crossed the line. "Did the FBI intercept the funds?" I asked, leaning forward. "Absolutely," Richard confirmed. The Cybercrimes Division was monitoring the exact routing sequence. The moment the wire hit the Federal Reserve Clearinghouse, the FBI froze the transaction. The money never left the country. The shadow lenders in the Caymans will not receive a single dime, and the $1.5 million routed to Vanessa's joint account has been locked in a holding pattern. They will see the money pending in their banking app, but they will not be able to withdraw a single cent. "And the crime?" I pressed, wanting absolute confirmation. "Fully documented," Richard said, "by using a fraudulent power of attorney and a forged corporate document to authorize the transfer of funds across state and international lines. Vanessa and Roxanne have committed a Class A federal felony, wire fraud, bank fraud, aggravated identity theft. This is not a civil dispute anymore, Gloria. This is a federal criminal conspiracy. They are going to realize the money is frozen soon," I said. "Roxanne's shadow lenders are going to start making threats when their payment does not arrive." "Exactly," Richard agreed. "They are going to panic. But because the bank will claim it is just a standard processing delay for large commercial transfers, they will not suspect they are under federal investigation yet. They will think it is just bureaucratic red tape. Let them think that," I said. "I want them to feel safe just a little bit longer." I opened my email and saw a new message from Trey. He had attached a screenshot from Vanessa's social media accounts. She had just posted a picture of herself and Roxanne, standing outside the federal bank, holding up champagne flutes. The caption read, "Celebrating massive new beginnings. Blessed and highly favored. Next stop, the ultimate mansion renovation party." Richard I said, staring at Vanessa's smiling face on the screen. "Vanessa is planning a massive party at the Buckhead mansion. She wants to show off her new property to all of her high society friends." "Yes," I said softly. "I think we should let them have their celebration. I think we should let them invite everyone they know. I want the caterers, the musicians, and the entire Atlanta elite standing in my ballroom." "I am planning to attend my own eviction party," I replied. "I want you to coordinate with the federal agents. Tell them to hold off on the arrest warrants. Do not pick them up at a traffic stop or quietly at their lawyer's office." "You want the FBI to raid the mansion during the party?" Richard guessed, catching on to my strategy perfectly. "I want them humiliated in front of every single person they ever tried to impress," I commanded. "I want them to stand in the center of the ballroom, wearing their expensive dresses and drinking their stolen champagne, when the federal agents kick the doors off the hinges. They wanted to take my legacy. I am going to make sure they are remembered in this city for exactly what they are." "I will make the calls," Gloria Richard said. "The FBI loves a dramatic takedown. They will be happy to oblige." I hung up the phone and closed my laptop. The morning light was pouring into my office, illuminating the plaques and awards I had earned over 4 decades of relentless hard work. I had fought tooth and nail to build my empire. I had bled for every dollar. Vanessa and Roxanne thought they could take a shortcut. They thought they could forge a few signatures and become millionaires overnight. They were about to learn that the consequences for stealing from a seasoned corporate executive were far worse than anything a shadow lender could ever do to them. The wheels of justice were turning, and I was the one steering the machine. All I had to do now was pick out the perfect outfit for a federal raid. Vanessa spared no expense. Through my window, I watched workers carrying massive floral arrangements featuring towers of white orchids. A local DJ brought massive speakers for the grand ballroom. She was throwing a massive renovation party to show off a property she had stolen just 72 hours prior. At 4, the heavy door to my suite swung open. Vanessa marched in wearing a custom-fitted silver evening gown. Behind her stood 2 massive men in dark suits with earpieces. Private security. "Gloria, we are having an important gathering tonight," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Because of your rapid cognitive decline, Marcus and I decided it is best for your safety that you remain in your room. We cannot have you wandering around causing a scene. These 2 gentlemen will ensure you stay put." "You are locking me in my own guest suite?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly mild. "It is for your own good, Mom," Vanessa sighed, placing a hand on her chest. "The guests are the absolute upper crust of Atlanta society. We have told everyone that your dementia has progressed to a tragic stage and you require permanent quarantine. Everyone understands. We programmed the smart locks on your door to accept only my master passcode. Do not try to leave." She turned and walked out. The heavy door closed, and I heard the distinct electronic beep of the smart lock engaging. A red light glowed on the keypad panel. I was officially a prisoner in my own home. I walked straight to my walk-in closet. I was not a prisoner. I was a CEO waiting before a major presentation. Tonight, the disguise was coming off completely. I unzipped the garment bag hanging at the very back and pulled out my armor. It was an emerald green skirt suit tailored to absolute perfection. I wore this exact suit the day I took my medical supply company public. The color green represents wealth growth and absolute control. I paired it with my diamond tennis bracelet and my sharpest black heels. I applied a bold crimson lipstick. Looking in the full-length mirror, the sweet old grandmother was completely gone. The corporate titan had returned. Checking my phone, it was 7 o'clock. The party downstairs was in full swing. Even through soundproofed walls, I could hear the heavy bass of the DJ sound system. I imagined Vanessa floating through the ballroom, holding a glass of stolen champagne, accepting compliments on her gorgeous new house. She was probably bragging to the other wealthy housewives about the expensive marble countertops she planned to install. She thought she was untouchable. I imagined Marcus playing the role of the successful entrepreneur, shaking hands with politicians. They were standing on top of a mountain of federal crimes, smiling for the cameras. At 8:15, my phone screen lit up with a text message from Trey. It read, "The firewall is down. The DJ booth is compromised. You are clear for takeoff." Trey had spent the afternoon sitting quietly in his bedroom, executing a brilliant digital siege on the mansion's smart home network. Vanessa thought her master passcode was secure. She did not realize she was sharing a roof with a cybersecurity prodigy who routinely bypassed military-grade encryption for extra credit. Trey easily sliced through the commercial-grade firewall protecting the electronic locks. He also tapped directly into the audio-visual control board. I walked to the heavy oak door. The red light on the electronic keypad blinked twice, then suddenly turned a solid, glowing green. The locking mechanism retracted with a loud, metallic clack. I pulled the door open. The 2 private security guards were standing at the end of the hallway. Hearing my door open, they both turned around, their eyes widening in shock. "Hey," one of the guards barked, stepping forward. "You are supposed to stay in there. The owner said the lock was secure." I did not stop walking. I marched directly toward them, my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. I looked the guard dead in his eyes, channeling the freezing glare I used to fire corrupt vice presidents. "Step aside, gentlemen," I commanded, my voice echoing off the walls with unyielding authority. "I am the sole owner of this estate. The woman who hired you committed massive federal wire fraud to steal the money paying your hourly rate. If you attempt to touch me, I will sue your private security firm into total bankruptcy before midnight." The guard froze. He looked at my emerald suit, my diamond bracelet, and the absolute lack of fear in my eyes. He nervously looked over at his equally terrified partner. Neither of them moved a single muscle. They were paid to babysit a confused old woman with severe dementia. They were not paid to physically assault a highly lucid, deeply intimidating billionaire, threatening them with corporate litigation. I walked right between them without breaking my stride. They pressed themselves against the walls to let me pass. I approached the grand sweeping staircase leading down to the main foyer. The chandelier above cast a brilliant, sparkling light over the scene below. The ballroom was packed with nearly 300 guests. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated with silver trays. The DJ was blasting a high-energy remix that had the crowd laughing and dancing. Vanessa stood near the center of the room, surrounded by a circle of wealthy socialites holding court like a newly crowned queen. Marcus stood pouring expensive vodka. I reached the top of the stairs and placed my hand on the polished mahogany railing. I took my first step down. At that precise second, Trey executed his final command sequence. The heavy bass of the music cut out instantly, leaving a jarring, ringing silence in the massive ballroom. The sudden lack of noise was so abrupt that conversations halted mid-sentence. People stopped dancing. Heads turned toward the DJ booth in confusion. The panicked DJ frantically tapped his soundboard, but the screens and speakers were completely locked out. I continued my descent down the grand staircase. The sharp click of my heels hitting the marble steps echoed loudly in the sudden quiet of the room. One by one, the guests turned to look at the staircase. They saw an older African-American woman, dressed in a razor-sharp emerald green power suit, walking down the stairs with the posture of an absolute monarch. They did not see a fragile dementia patient. They saw a woman who radiated authority and unshakable confidence. I kept my chin high, letting the heavy silence of the room amplify my entrance. The chandelier illuminated the diamond tennis bracelet on my wrist, flashing light. I reached the bottom of the stairs and stepped onto the ballroom floor. The crowd of high society elites, politicians, and investors stared at me in stunned silence. Vanessa had spent the last 2 hours telling everyone in this room that her mother-in-law was a tragic victim of rapid dementia, quarantined upstairs for her own safety, unable to dress herself or speak coherently. The woman walking toward them was the exact opposite of that lie. I walked forward, and the crowd instinctively parted from me. They stepped back, moving out of my way. I kept my eyes locked on Vanessa. She was standing, frozen, near the center of the dance floor. The color drained completely from her face. Her jaw dropped open, and the crystal champagne flute in her hand began to tremble violently. Roxanne, who was standing near the buffet tables, dropped a plate of appetizers directly onto the floor. The ceramic plate shattered into dozens of tiny pieces, but nobody even blinked or looked away from the staircase. Marcus turned around, his eyes widening in pure horror. I walked right up to Vanessa, stopping less than 3 feet away from her. The entire ballroom was holding its breath. The silence was so absolute, you could hear the ice melting in the cocktail glasses. Vanessa stared at me, her chest heaving with panic. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Her lips moved, forming words she was too terrified to actually vocalize. She was looking at a ghost. She was looking at a woman she thought she had buried under a mountain of fake medical documents and forged bank signatures. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream. I just looked at her with a very calm and chilling smile. It was the perfect moment to pull the string. The crystal champagne flute slipped from Vanessa's trembling fingers. It hit the marble floor with a sharp crash, sending shards of glass and expensive liquor across the toes of her silver evening gown. The sound broke the spell that held the room hostage. Vanessa snapped out of her paralyzed state, and panic completely consumed her. She spun around wildly, looking for the private security guards I had just bypassed in the hallway. "Somebody get her out of here!" Vanessa screamed, her voice cracking in a high, hysterical pitch. "She is sick! She is having a severe dementia episode. Grab her! She is a danger to herself." The two massive men in dark suits remained frozen at the base of the grand staircase. They crossed their arms and looked down at the floor, refusing to make eye contact with her. They knew exactly who signed their paychecks, and they were not going to risk corporate litigation to save a desperate fraudster. Marcus rushed forward from the bar. He looked terrified and deeply embarrassed by the sudden spectacle. "Mother," he said, reaching out to grab my arm, "you are confused. You need to go back upstairs to your room right now. We have doctors coming." "I am not confused, Marcus," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the dead silent room, "and I am not going anywhere." I walked past him, leaving him standing awkwardly on the dance floor. I made my way directly to the elevated DJ booth at the far end of the ballroom. The young DJ took one look at my face and immediately stepped aside. He unclipped his wireless microphone from the stand and handed it to me without asking a single question. I took the microphone and tapped the top. The sharp, rhythmic thud echoed through the massive speakers, confirming the sound system was entirely under my control. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice booming smoothly through the ballroom. "I hope you are all enjoying the catering and the beautiful floral arrangements. I certainly am. It is not every day a woman gets to attend a lavish celebration paid for entirely by federal wire fraud. My daughter-in-law has spent the last 2 hours telling you all a very tragic story." I continued pacing slowly across the elevated platform. "She told you that I am suffering from rapid cognitive decline. She told you I am a helpless, confused old woman who needs to be quarantined for my own safety. She told you she and my son bought this magnificent estate to take care of me." I raised my free hand and gestured toward the massive audiovisual screens hanging on the walls behind me. Trey hit the button. The screens, which had previously been displaying a sparkling silver monogram of Vanessa and Marcus, instantly flashed white. High-resolution images of official legal documents appeared on the massive displays for every single guest to read. "I am Gloria Morrison," I announced, projecting my voice with absolute unyielding authority. "I built a $40 million medical supply empire from the trunk of a used car. I am the sole managing member of Apex Legacy Holdings, LLC. And as you can see on the screens behind me, that company holds the exclusive, unencumbered deed to this $2.5 million mansion. You are standing in my house. For the past 48 hours, my daughter-in-law and her mother have been working tirelessly to steal this property from me." I continued the microphone, amplifying the cold fury in my tone. "They believed my age made me an easy target. Yesterday, they took me to lunch and presented me with a fraudulent corporate guarantor agreement. They told me it was a simple character reference for my son. They intended to use my signature to secure a $2 million commercial loan against my company. What they did not know is that I signed that document using a specialized security pen filled with vanishing ink," I said. I smiled, a sharp, predatory smile. By noon today, my signature completely evaporated. When Vanessa submitted that document to the First Federal Bank of Atlanta this morning, she submitted a forged blank contract. The wire transfer was approved, but the federal authorities froze the money the second it hit the clearinghouse. "You committed bank fraud, Vanessa." Marcus stared at me, his face pale and twisted with confusion. "Mother, what are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "A $2 million loan. She told me we were filing a hardship claim to break the lease. She told me we were just negotiating a buyout." I looked down at my son. The disappointment I felt was a heavy, physical weight in my chest. "You are a fool, Marcus," I said coldly. "You thought your wife was just trying to secure a larger house for your business? You were willing to help her commit lease fraud because you felt entitled to live rent-free. But you had absolutely no idea who you were actually married to." I gestured to the screens again. Trey transitioned the slides. A new document appeared. It was a promissory note from an illegal offshore lending syndicate. "This is the real reason your wife desperately needed $2 million, I announced to the entire room. Roxanne has a massive offshore gambling addiction. She currently owes $500,000 to violent shadow lenders. They gave her a 30-day deadline before they came to collect. But it gets worse, Marcus, I said, my voice cutting through the noise like a knife. Look at the collateral listed on that promissory note. My retirement accounts, he gasped. You pledged my retirement accounts. Vanessa forged your signature, Marcus, I confirmed. She gave them everything you have ever saved. If they defaulted, you would have lost every single dime to illegal bookmakers. They needed the equity from this house to pay off the sharks and cover their tracks before you ever found out. But the financial crimes are not even the darkest part of this story, I said, pulling the crowd's attention back to me. Trey, switch the slide. The screens flashed again. This time, a bright white laboratory toxicology report appeared. When Vanessa realized the bank required a cognitive competency sign-off for an elderly guarantor, she panicked, I explained. She brought a corrupt concierge doctor into my private suite this afternoon. She intended to have me declared legally incompetent so she could seize total control of my estate. To ensure I failed the medical examination, she brought me a mug of chamomile tea. I did not drink the tea, I announced. I poured it into the soil of a potted plant while she was not looking. I then had a private courier deliver that soil to an independent laboratory for immediate testing. The toxicology report confirms the tea was spiked with a massive lethal dose of liquid acepromazine, I declared. For those of you unfamiliar with veterinary medicine, that is a heavy tranquilizer used to sedate horses. My daughter-in-law attempted to poison me in my own home to steal my corporate legacy. Vanessa curled into a tight ball on the marble floor, pressing her hands over her ears to block out the noise of the angry crowd. Roxanne abandoned her designer bag and sprinted toward the kitchen doors, desperately trying to find a way out of the mansion. But the night was not over yet. I lowered the microphone and looked toward the massive oak front doors of the mansion. The grand finale was just arriving. She lunged at the technical equipment with the desperate violence of a trapped animal. She slammed her hands against the soundboard, trying to find the main power switch to kill the massive projector screens that were currently displaying her federal crimes to the entire room. She clawed at the braided cables, tearing her expensive manicured fingernails to the quick. "Shut it off!" she shrieked, her voice hoarse and broken. "Shut it off right now, you crazy old witch!" She grabbed a heavy monitor and tried to hurl it to the ground, but Trey stepped forward, placing his tall frame firmly between his stepmother and the primary server rack. He did not lay a hand on her, but he blocked her path with the immovable stance of a young man who had spent the last 2 years watching this woman disrespect his grandmother. "You are not touching this network, Vanessa," Trey said, his voice steady and remarkably calm for a 19-year-old. "The firewall is locked." Just as Roxanne pushed her way through the swinging wooden doors of the catering kitchen, the front of the mansion exploded into action. The massive double oak doors of the main entrance did not simply open, they were thrown apart with earth-shattering force. The heavy wood crashed against the foyer walls, rattling the antique mirrors hanging in the hallway. "Federal agents, nobody move," a voice roared, cutting through the chaotic murmurs of the ballroom with absolute tactical authority. "Secure the perimeter," the lead agent commanded, stepping onto the marble floor of the ballroom. His eyes scanned the crowd, immediately identifying the targets based on the photographs Richard had provided in the case file. "Team Alpha, lock down the service exits. Team Beta, secure the primary suspects." 3 agents immediately broke off from the main group and sprinted directly toward the catering kitchen. They pushed through the swinging doors just seconds after Roxanne had disappeared behind them. I heard the muffled sounds of metal catering trays crashing to the floor, followed by a sharp command to get on the ground. A moment later, the kitchen doors swung open again. 2 federal agents marched Roxanne back out into the bright light of the ballroom. They each held one of her arms in a firm, tactical grip. Her expensive hair extensions were a tangled mess. She had lost one of her designer heels in the struggle, and she was limping awkwardly as they dragged her across the polished floor. The stolen leather tote bag had been confiscated and was being carried by a third agent as primary evidence. "Let go of me!" Roxanne screamed, struggling vainly against the agents holding her arms. "Do you know who I am? I demand to call my lawyer. You have no right to treat me like this." "You have the right to remain silent, ma'am," one of the agents replied, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "I highly suggest you start exercising it." On the other side of the ballroom, a separate team of agents rapidly approached the DJ booth. Vanessa saw them coming. The reality of her situation finally breached the wall of her deep delusion. The federal government was walking across the dance floor to take her away. She scrambled backward, away from the glass partition, shaking her head wildly. "No!" she cried out, stepping on the hem of her ruined silver dress. "No, it was a mistake! I did not do anything wrong. It was my mother. My mother told me to sign the papers. I did not know it was illegal." Vanessa Morrison, the lead agent, stated, stepping up to the base of the DJ platform. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft." Vanessa tried to run. She spun around and took 2 steps toward the side exit, but an agent quickly intercepted her, grabbing her wrist and spinning her back around. She kicked and thrashed, her fake Southern charm completely dissolving into aggressive street-level panic. "Get your hands off me!" she shrieked, trying to scratch the agent's arm. "Marcus, do something! Tell them to let me go!" "Marcus, use your mother's money to stop them." Marcus stood absolutely frozen near the overturned cocktail tables. His face was a mask of pure cowardice. He watched his wife actively resisting arrest by a federal officer, and he did not move a single inch to help her. He realized that stepping forward right now would only implicate him further in the federal conspiracy. He looked at the agents holding his wife, and then he slowly took a physical step backward, disappearing into the crowd of terrified guests. He was saving his own skin. The agent easily overpowered Vanessa, pulling her arms firmly behind her back. The sharp, metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking around her wrists echoed clearly over the stunned silence of the ballroom. It was the most beautiful sound I had heard all year. It sounded like vindication. It sounded like justice. Roxanne was forced to her knees beside her daughter. Another set of handcuffs clicked into place, locking the older woman's wrists together. The lead agent pulled a printed document from his jacket pocket and began reading them their Miranda rights in a loud, clear voice, ensuring every single guest in the room could hear the legal reality of the situation. "You have the right to remain silent," the agent read. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." Vanessa stopped fighting. The physical fight completely drained out of her as the cold steel bit into her skin. She looked up at me, standing elevated in the DJ booth, looking down at her like a judge presiding over a tribunal. Her makeup was ruined, running in dark black streaks down her pale cheeks. She was breathing heavily, totally defeated. The high society friends she had invited to this lavish party were actively recording her arrest on their cell phones. By tomorrow morning, the footage of her being dragged out of this mansion in handcuffs would be circulating on every local news station and social media platform in the state of Georgia. She had wanted to be famous in Atlanta. She was about to be infamous. "Bring them out," the lead agent ordered, signaling to his team. The federal agents hauled Vanessa and Roxanne to their feet. They marched the 2 women across the length of the grand ballroom, parading them right through the center of the crowd. The wealthy elite parted for them, watching in disgusted fascination as the mother and daughter duo, who had tried to steal a $40 million legacy, were escorted out of the front doors like common criminals. They were walked out into the humid Atlanta night toward the flashing red and blue lights of the federal vehicles waiting in the circular driveway. I stood in the DJ booth and watched the heavy oak doors close behind them. I felt a profound sense of satisfaction wash over me. The corporate eviction was complete. They had tried to throw me out of my home to pay their debts. Now they did not even own the clothes on their backs. The federal government would seize their bank accounts, their vehicles, and any assets they claimed to possess in order to pay restitution. They were entering a system that did not care about their fake charm or their designer dresses. The guests in the ballroom slowly began to realize the party was officially over. There would be no catering served tonight. There would be no dancing. They quietly began moving toward the coat check, whispering to each other in shocked, hushed tones. They were looking at me with a newfound sense of deep intimidation. They had arrived expecting to drink the champagne of a rising socialite. They were leaving with the absolute certainty that Gloria Morrison was a woman who could dismantle a criminal conspiracy and orchestrate a federal raid without ever breaking a sweat. Trey stood next to me, closing his laptop and sliding it into his backpack. He looked at the empty dance floor and let out a long breath. "We actually did it, Grandma," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. "We really did it." I reached out and patted my grandson gently on the shoulder. "Yes, we did, Trey," I said, my voice soft but incredibly firm. "But the cleanup is just beginning." I looked across the room and saw Marcus standing alone in the shadows of the grand staircase. He looked completely shattered. He looked like a man who had just realized he backed the wrong side in a war he never fully understood. He was about to learn that my corporate ruthlessness was not just reserved for my in-laws. The grand ballroom of the Buckhead mansion was completely silent now. The 300 wealthy guests had fled like frightened mice, scurrying out into the humid Atlanta night to escape the federal raid. The heavy oak doors were closed, sealing us inside the ruined aftermath of my daughter-in-law's criminal celebration. The floor was a disaster zone of shattered crystal champagne flutes, crushed white orchids, and discarded designer handbags left behind in the sheer panic of the FBI invasion. Through the massive front windows, the flashing red and blue lights of the federal vehicles cast long, rhythmic shadows across the polished marble. I stood near the DJ booth looking down at the wreckage of the illusion Vanessa had tried to build. Trey stood quietly beside me, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He did not say a word. He just watched the center of the room where my son was currently standing. Marcus looked like a man who had just survived a plane crash, only to realize he was stranded on a deserted island. His expensive, tailored tuxedo jacket was rumpled. His tie was undone. He was staring at the front doors where his wife and mother-in-law had just been dragged out in steel handcuffs by federal agents. He was breathing in shallow, erratic gasps. He slowly turned around to face me. The absolute reality of his situation was finally crashing down on his privileged shoulders. He had no wife. He had no house. He had no access to the stolen wealth he thought he had secured. And worst of all, he was standing in a room with the mother he had actively tried to destroy. Marcus took a hesitant step forward. The sound of his leather dress shoes crunching on broken glass echoed loudly in the empty ballroom. He took another step, his knees visibly shaking. Then his legs completely gave out beneath him. My son collapsed onto the marble floor, dropping heavily to his knees. He looked up at me, and the tears began to stream down his face. "Mother!" he cried, his voice breaking into a pathetic, desperate sob. "Mother, you have to help me. Please, you have to call Richard. You have to get your lawyers to fix this." "I did not know Vanessa was doing all of this," Marcus sobbed, crawling forward on his knees until he was just a few feet away from the elevated platform. He reached out his hands toward me, pleading. "You have to believe me, Mother. I swear to God I did not know about the federal wire fraud. I did not know about Roxanne's shadow lenders. I thought we were just trying to get out of the corporate lease. Vanessa lied to me. She manipulated me. She told me the doctors said you were actually sick. She told me she was handling everything legally." He was putting on a masterful performance of innocent victimhood. If I had not spent the last week monitoring every single breath he took inside this house, I might have actually believed him. I might have felt a twinge of maternal pity. But I knew the truth. I knew exactly the kind of man my son had chosen to become. I looked over at Trey. "Hand me the blue folder, Trey," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. Trey unzipped his backpack and pulled out a crisp blue heavy-duty folder. He handed it to me without a word. I opened the folder and pulled out a stack of printed papers. I stepped down from the DJ platform and walked slowly toward Marcus. I stopped just out of his reach, looking down at his tear-stained face. "You claim you were manipulated, Marcus," I stated, my tone razor-sharp. "You claim Vanessa tricked you into believing she was acting in my best interest. You claim you had no idea about the forged signatures or the fake medical records." "Yes," Mother Marcus cried, nodding his head frantically. "Yes, I swear. I would never hurt you. I would never try to steal from you. You are my mother. I love you." I looked down at the top sheet of paper in my hand. "This is a transcribed audio log captured by the security cameras in my private suite yesterday afternoon," I said, reading the header out loud. "This conversation took place exactly 20 minutes after Vanessa brought the corrupt concierge doctor into my room. You and Vanessa were standing in the hallway right outside my door." I looked up from the paper and locked my eyes onto his. "Would you like to hear exactly what you said, Marcus?" Marcus froze. The desperate, pleading expression on his face vanished completely, instantly replaced by a look of stark, terrifying realization. I read directly from the printed transcript, projecting my voice so every word bounced off the ballroom walls. "Vanessa says the doctor signed the incompetence declaration. Now we have everything we need to take her assets." And you replied, and I quote exactly from the recording, "Yes, finally. Now we can file the emergency power of attorney and take over the corporate trust. Just make sure the bank does not look too closely at the guarantor signature you forged. We need that $2 million to clear your mother's mess before the weekend." "You knew, Marcus," I said, taking a step closer to him. "You knew she forged my signature on a federal banking document. You knew the doctor was a paid actor. You knew I was not suffering from dementia. You knew they were trying to steal $2 million from my company to pay off loan sharks. And yet, you walked into that probate attorney's office and you signed your name on a legal petition swearing under oath that I was mentally broken. You signed away my civil and human rights for a payout." "But they threatened me," Marcus whispered, his voice shaking with pure cowardice. "Vanessa said if I did not help them, Roxanne's creditors would come after us. They would come to this house. I was trying to protect our family." "You were trying to protect yourself," I corrected harshly. "A real man protects his mother from predators. He does not hold the door open and invite them inside to feast on her legacy. You sold me, Marcus. You sold the woman who broke her back to build the empire that paid for the very clothes you are wearing right now." I reached into the blue folder and pulled out one final document. It was a single sheet of paper, printed on the official heavy stock letterhead of Apex Legacy Holdings, LLC. It bore my genuine signature and the embossed seal of my corporate legal team. I dropped the paper directly onto the marble floor right in front of his knees. "What is this?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. He looked down at the paper, as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike him. "That is a perfectly legal 30-day notice of eviction," I announced. "As the sole managing member of the corporate entity that owns this property, I am officially terminating your residential lease due to gross violation of terms and attempted fraud. You have exactly 30 days to pack whatever personal belongings you can prove you're purchased with your own money and vacate this premises entirely." Marcus stared at the eviction notice, his eyes welling up with fresh tears of absolute devastation. "Mother, please," he begged, leaning forward and pressing his forehead against the cold marble floor. "Please do not do this to me. I have nothing left. My bank accounts are frozen. The feds are going to question me. I do not have a lawyer. I do not have anywhere to go. You cannot just throw me out on the street. I am your son. You are a grown man who made a calculated decision to conspire against a wealthy senior citizen, I replied, my voice as hard and unyielding as granite. The fact that the senior citizen happened to be your mother only makes your crime that much more despicable. I will not shield you from the consequences of your actions, Marcus. I will not pay for your defense attorney. I will not give you a single dime from my trust. You wanted to play the game of corporate espionage and federal wire fraud. Now you can experience the absolute ruin that comes with losing that game. I turned my back on him. I did not feel the urge to hug him. I did not feel the urge to offer him a comforting word. The toxic maternal bond that had tied me to his endless failures was completely, permanently severed. I had cut the dead weight from my life, and I felt remarkably light. "Let us go, Trey," I said, looking over at my grandson. "We have a lot of work to do tomorrow." Trey nodded. He adjusted his backpack and walked toward me. He did not look down at his father weeping on the floor. He walked right past him, stepping carefully over the broken glass and the ruined flowers. I walked toward the grand, sweeping staircase, leaving Marcus alone in the center of the shattered ballroom. His cries echoed behind me, pathetic and weak. He was finally learning the hardest lesson of his privileged life. When you bite the hand that feeds you, you will inevitably starve. I placed my hand on the polished mahogany railing and began to ascend the stairs. My empire was entirely secure. My enemies were sitting in federal holding cells. My wealth was untouchable. And the grandson who had proven his loyalty was walking right beside me, ready to learn how to truly lead. I had survived the ambush. Now it was time to rebuild the kingdom on my own terms. 6 months later, the heavy wooden doors of the federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta swung open to reveal a packed room. The air conditioning was freezing, but I wore my emerald green blazer with absolute comfort. I sat in the front row of the gallery, directly behind the prosecution table. Across the aisle sat Vanessa and Roxanne. They traded their designer gowns for standard-issue federal holding uniforms during their initial processing, but today they wore tailored suits provided by their defense team. They looked exhausted. The stress of facing 20 years in a federal penitentiary had aged my daughter-in-law a decade in just 6 months. Her hair was pulled back tightly, and her hands shook constantly. Marcus sat 3 rows behind them, looking completely hollowed out. He was broke, living in a cheap motel and attending court every day, hoping to salvage some shred of his destroyed life. The trial had been brutal. The federal prosecutors laid out a meticulous case of wire fraud and conspiracy, but Vanessa hired a ruthless defense attorney named Sterling. He was a man known for twisting narratives and turning victims into villains. He paced back and forth in front of the jury box, projecting a booming voice filled with manufactured outrage. He pointed his finger directly at me while the jury watched. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Sterling began, his voice dripping with dramatic sympathy. "The prosecution wants you to believe my client Vanessa is a mastermind criminal. But look at the facts. What we actually have here is a classic family dispute blown entirely out of proportion by a vindictive, controlling mother-in-law. Gloria Morrison is a woman of immense wealth and immense power. She built a corporate empire, and she expects everyone in her life to bow to her absolute authority. When her son Marcus married Vanessa, Gloria felt her control slipping. She set a trap. She orchestrated a massive misunderstanding to punish a young woman who simply wanted to secure a permanent home for her family. Sterling leaned on the wooden rail of the jury box, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Vanessa did not intend to commit bank fraud. She was led to believe by Gloria herself that the corporate paperwork was a simple family transfer. The prosecution claims Vanessa tried to drug her mother-in-law, but where is the proof of intent? A stressed young woman looking for herbal remedies online is not a murderer. Gloria Morrison manufactured this entire spectacle because she hates her daughter-in-law. She used her corporate resources to crush a young family. The federal prosecutor, a sharp woman named Hayes, stood up. She did not yell. She did not pace. She calmly walked to the podium and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, the prosecution calls Trey Morrison to the stand." Trey walked through the wooden swinging doors of the courtroom, wearing a crisp navy suit. He looked incredibly sharp. He walked with the posture of a young man who knew exactly how much power he held in his hands. He took the oath, sat in the witness box, and adjusted the microphone. The defense attorney let out a loud, arrogant sigh, clearly dismissing my 19-year-old grandson as an amateur witness. It was the worst mistake Sterling could have possibly made. Mr. Morrison Hayes began walking toward the jury box. "You are a sophomore at Georgia Tech studying cybersecurity. Can you tell the court exactly what you discovered when you analyzed the network traffic in the Buckhead mansion 6 months ago?" Trey nodded and looked directly at the jury. "My stepmother Vanessa locked me out of the home internet network because she claimed I used too much bandwidth. When I bypassed the router to regain access, I discovered an unencrypted folder on her desktop. I began monitoring the network traffic because I found documents related to illegal offshore gambling debts belonging to her mother, Roxanne." Sterling immediately jumped to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. My client's mother's gambling habits have nothing to do with a bank loan. Goes directly to motive, Your Honor," Hayes countered smoothly. "We will show that the defendants needed $2 million to pay off a violent shadow lender." The judge nodded. "Overruled. Proceed, Mr. Morrison." Trey leaned into the microphone. "Roxanne owed $500,000 to an illegal gambling syndicate operating out of the Cayman Islands. I intercepted the wire transfer requests from Vanessa's computer. I traced the IP addresses. Vanessa and Roxanne used Marcus's retirement accounts as collateral for a short-term shadow loan to keep the bookmakers away. When that loan came due, they panicked. They needed a massive injection of cash immediately. That is why they attempted to defraud Apex Legacy Holdings, LLC. They needed the house equity to cover the offshore debt." Hayes pulled up a digital exhibit on the large monitors facing the jury box. "Mr. Morrison, can you identify these documents?" "Yes," Trey said confidently. "Those are the digital notary stamps applied to the guarantor agreement. Vanessa purchased a fake digital notary seal from a dark web marketplace using a prepaid debit card. I tracked the transaction through the blockchain. She downloaded the fake seal onto her personal laptop at exactly 2 in the morning the day before the bank meeting. She intentionally forged a federal banking document. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a calculated, premeditated act of fraud." Trey pulled a printed log from his suit pocket. "I recovered the deleted search history from her primary browser," he stated, his voice echoing clearly across the silent courtroom. "On the night before the medical concierge doctor arrived, Vanessa spent 3 hours searching for very specific terms." Trey read directly from the log. At 11:15, she searched, "How to induce temporary confusion in elderly patients." At 11:40, she searched, "Medications that mimic dementia symptoms." At midnight, she searched where to buy heavy animal tranquilizers without a veterinary license. And at 12:30, she purchased a vial of liquid asapromazine from an unregulated overseas pharmacy. She did not just search for it. Trey continued speaking over the murmurs. "I pulled the security camera footage from the kitchen pantry. I watched her use a dropper to put the animal tranquilizer directly into my grandmother's chamomile tea. She intended to chemically sedate her so the corrupt doctor could declare her legally incompetent. They wanted to steal her civil rights to gain control of her bank accounts." Hayes turned to the defense table. "The toxicology report we submitted into evidence confirms the presence of lethal animal sedatives in the soil where Gloria Morrison disposed of the tea. The digital evidence perfectly matches the physical evidence." Sterling stood up to cross-examine Trey, but he had absolutely nothing to work with. He tried to attack Trey's methods, questioning if the network breach was legal, but the judge quickly shut him down. The evidence had already been certified by federal cybercrime units. Trey did not flinch. He sat in the witness box and methodically destroyed every single lie Vanessa had ever told. He explained the IP addresses, the offshore accounts, the fake medical forms, and the forged signatures with the precise clinical accuracy of a seasoned expert. When Trey finally stepped down from the stand, the energy in the courtroom had entirely shifted. The jury was no longer looking at a complicated family dispute. They were looking at a highly organized, predatory ring of elder abuse. They saw Vanessa and Roxanne for exactly what they were. They were ruthless criminals who had targeted an older woman to fund their own illegal debts. They thought they could commit massive federal crimes because they assumed nobody would check the digital footprints. They assumed wrong. I sat in the gallery and watched Vanessa's defense completely crumble. Her attorney sat back down at the table and began whispering furiously into her ear, clearly advising her that the trial was essentially over. Roxanne was sobbing silently into a tissue, knowing she would likely spend the rest of her natural life behind bars. Marcus sat 3 rows behind them, his face buried in his hands. He finally understood the full, terrifying scope of the monster he had married. He realized that if I had not poured that tea into the plant, he would be an accessory to my actual murder. The federal prosecutor rested her case. She did not need to say another word. The digital evidence was an ironclad vault, and Vanessa was locked securely inside. I looked at Trey as he walked past the prosecution table and took a seat in the gallery. I gave him a slow, approving nod. He had fought brilliantly. He had defended my legacy and his own future with perfect precision. The dominoes were falling exactly as I had arranged them. All that was left now was for the judge to read the final score. Across the aisle, Vanessa and Roxanne sat at the defense table. The past 6 months had stripped away every ounce of their manufactured glamour. Vanessa wore a drab gray pantsuit that hung loosely on her frame. Her hair lacked its usual expensive blowout. Roxanne looked even worse. The stress of impending incarceration had carved deep lines into her face. They were no longer the confident socialites who threw lavish parties with stolen money. They were terrified criminals waiting for the axe to fall. 3 rows behind them sat Marcus. I did not turn around to look at him, but I could see his reflection in the glass partition separating the gallery from the well of the court. My son looked completely destroyed. He was wearing a suit that looked like he had slept in it for a week. His shoulders were slumped. His hands were clasped tightly together. He was broke, living in a cheap motel and completely isolated. He attended the trial every single day, hoping for some miracle that would absolve his wife and restore his comfortable life. But miracles do not exist in federal courtrooms. Only consequences exist here. Suddenly, the heavy wooden doors near the judge's chambers swung open. Roxanne's defense attorney walked out looking extremely agitated. He marched over to the prosecution table and leaned down, whispering frantically to the lead federal prosecutor. I watched the exchange closely. The prosecutor crossed her arms and shook her head, but Roxanne's attorney kept pushing, gesturing wildly toward his client. Trey leaned closer to me. "What are they doing?" he whispered. "Roxanne is trying to cut a deal," I replied softly, keeping my eyes on the defense table. "She knows the jury is coming back with a guilty verdict. She is trying to throw Vanessa under the bus to save herself." I was absolutely right. Roxanne's attorney walked back to the defense table and leaned down to whisper in Roxanne's ear. Roxanne nodded vigorously and pointed an accusing finger directly at Vanessa. I could hear the sharp hiss of their voices carrying across the silent courtroom. "I am not going down for your stupid plan," Roxanne hissed, loudly enough for the gallery to hear. "You were the one who researched the animal tranquilizers. You were the one who forced me to sign the bank documents. I am telling the prosecutor everything right now." Vanessa snapped her head around to stare at her mother. Her eyes widened in pure disbelief. "You are blaming me?" Vanessa shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "It was your gambling debt. You owed the shadow lenders $500,000. I did all of this to save your life and keep you out of trouble. You did this because you wanted that mansion," Roxanne spat back, completely abandoning any pretense of maternal loyalty. "You forged the corporate signatures. You bought the fake notary stamps online. I am asking for full immunity in exchange for my direct testimony against you." Vanessa lost her mind. She lunged out of her chair, grabbing her mother by the collar of her gray suit. "You absolute traitor!" Vanessa screamed, shaking her mother violently. "I ruined my entire life for you." "Order in this court," a booming voice demanded. The judge had entered the room. He was a stern man with white hair and a reputation for handing down maximum sentences in white-collar crime cases. He slammed his gavel down, silencing the chaotic shouting match. The marshals forced Vanessa back into her chair. She was weeping uncontrollably, her face buried in her hands. Roxanne sat as far away from her as physically possible, staring straight ahead with cold, calculated desperation. "If the defendants cannot maintain decorum, they will be removed and sentenced in absentia," the judge warned, his voice echoing off the granite walls. "Is that understood?" Both defense attorneys quickly nodded, offering frantic apologies on behalf of their clients. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked toward the back of the room. "Bring in the jury," he commanded. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked. "We have, Your Honor," the jury foreman replied, standing up and handing a folded slip of paper to the bailiff. The bailiff walked the paper over to the judge. The judge unfolded it and read it silently. His expression did not change. He handed it back to the bailiff to read aloud for the official record. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, we find the defendants, Vanessa Morrison and Roxanne Vance, guilty," the bailiff read, his voice clear and unwavering. "On the charge of aggravated identity theft, we find the defendants guilty. On the charge of bank fraud, we find the defendants guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit elder abuse, we find the defendants guilty. Guilty on all counts." The words hit the courtroom like a physical blow. Vanessa let out a long, agonizing wail. Roxanne simply closed her eyes and let her head fall forward. Her last-minute attempt to throw her daughter under the bus had failed completely. The federal prosecutor had refused the deal because she already had all the digital evidence Trey provided. They did not need Roxanne's testimony. They had the absolute truth. The judge picked up his gavel, but he did not strike it immediately. He looked down at the two women sitting at the defense table. His gaze was heavy with absolute contempt. "In my 20 years on the bench, I have presided over hundreds of fraud cases," the judge began, his voice ringing with harsh authority. "I have seen corporate embezzlement and grand larceny, but the crimes committed in this courtroom are among the most despicable I have ever witnessed. You did not just steal money from a bank. You targeted a senior citizen. You targeted your own family member. You planned to chemically sedate her, steal her civil rights, and rob her of her entire life's work, simply to fund your own lavish lifestyles and pay off illegal gambling debts. Your actions were predatory, calculated, and deeply malicious." The judge continued mercilessly. "You assumed that because the victim was an older woman, she would be an easy target. You assumed she would be too weak or too confused to stop you. You were entirely wrong. The victim in this case demonstrated extraordinary resilience and intelligence. She stopped your criminal enterprise single-handedly. It is the judgment of this court," the judge announced, raising his voice, "that the defendants, Vanessa Morrison and Roxanne Vance, are hereby sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary with no possibility of parole. You are also ordered to pay full restitution for the legal and investigative costs incurred by the victim." The judge slammed his gavel down. "Court is adjourned." The federal marshals immediately moved in. They pulled Vanessa and Roxanne to their feet. The sharp click of handcuffs locking around their wrists echoed through the room. Vanessa looked back toward the gallery, searching frantically for her husband. "Marcus!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Marcus, please, help me! Do not let them take me away!" I turned slightly to look at my son. Marcus was standing in the aisle, watching his wife being hauled away by federal agents. He did not step forward. He did not offer words of comfort. He just stood there looking completely empty. He had lost absolutely everything. He had lost his beautiful young wife to a 15-year prison sentence. He had lost his luxurious Buckhead mansion. He had lost his lucrative career because the scandal ruined his professional reputation. And he had lost his mother. Marcus slowly shifted his gaze from Vanessa to me. He looked at me with eyes full of desperate, profound regret. He was bankrupt, living in a squalid motel, and facing a future entirely devoid of the wealth and privilege I had provided him since birth. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to beg for one final chance at redemption. I did not let him say a single word. I simply looked at him with eyes as cold and unforgiving as the marble floors of the courthouse. I gave him a slow, deliberate nod, confirming exactly what he already knew. He chose to enable a monster, and now he had to live in the ruins she left behind. I turned my back on my son. "Come on, Trey," I said quietly, picking up my purse. "We have a corporate board meeting to attend. It is time to get back to business." Trey smiled a sharp, confident smile. "Right behind you, Grandma," he said. We walked down the center aisle of the courtroom together, leaving Marcus standing alone in the gallery. The heavy wooden doors closed behind us, shutting out the sounds of Vanessa's weeping and the reality of my son's destroyed life. The trial was over. The traitors were locked away. The corporate empire was safe. Now it was time to restructure my company and teach my brilliant grandson how to truly rule the world. The scent of corrugated cardboard and industrial antiseptic hit me the moment I walked through the double doors of my original medical supply warehouse. It was a sharp, metallic smell that always grounded me. 40 years ago, I swept the concrete floors of a space a fraction of this size. Today, a fleet of yellow forklifts zipped between towering shelves of inventory, loading pallets of surgical supplies onto delivery trucks bound for hospitals across the state. The warehouse floor was a symphony of organized motion. It was the beating heart of the $40 million empire I built from scratch. I climbed the metal staircase to the glass-walled executive office overlooking the logistics floor. The office was simple, functional, and entirely mine. I took off my coat and sat down at the drafting table. Spread across the surface were the thick binders containing my corporate succession plans. For the past decade, the name Marcus Morrison had been printed on the primary beneficiary and executive transition lines. I picked up a thick black marker and drew a single, heavy line straight through his name. Marcus was disinherited, completely removed from every trust account and corporate charter I possessed, completely forever. The toxic maternal bond was severed, but it left a massive structural vacuum in my company. The board of directors was already getting anxious. I was 68 years old. In the corporate world, sharks can smell a succession crisis from a mile away. Without a clear heir apparent, rival distributors would assume Apex Legacy Holdings was vulnerable. They would try to poach my hospital contracts and force a hostile buyout, thinking I was too tired to fight back after the family scandal. I stared at the blank line on the document. Building wealth is only half the difficult battle. Protecting it after you are gone requires someone who shares your exact vision. Marcus only ever saw the money. He never saw the sacrifice. Now I needed a captain to steer the ship, but I refused to hand my legacy over to a boardroom of strangers who did not understand the blood and sweat poured into the foundation. The door to the office opened. Trey walked in carrying a cardboard tray with 2 cups of black coffee. He set one down on the desk in front of me and took a seat in the metal chair opposite mine perfectly quietly. He was wearing jeans and a Georgia Tech hooded sweatshirt, a stark contrast to the sharp navy suit he wore in the federal courtroom just 24 hours ago. "I thought I would find you here," Trey said, taking a sip of his coffee. You always come to the warehouse when you are formulating a new strategy. I am trying to solve a puzzle, I admitted, gesturing to the open binders on the table. A $40 million company needs a future, Trey. Your father was supposed to be that future. Now the succession plan is entirely and totally blank. The board wants me to hire an outside executive firm to find a replacement, but I do not trust outsiders with my legacy. Trey set his coffee cup down. He unzipped his canvas backpack and pulled out his silver laptop. He did not look intimidated by the massive numbers I was discussing. He looked incredibly focused. I have been thinking about that exact problem, Grandma Trey said, opening the laptop and booting up the screen. I know you think of me as just the cybersecurity guy who bypassed Vanessa Router, but I have spent the last 6 long entire months sitting in the back of courtrooms and listening to how easily people try to manipulate financial systems. I realized that protecting a legacy is not just about locking the digital doors. It is about optimizing the entire machine so nobody can ever find a weak point. I leaned back in my chair, intrigued. What exactly are you showing me, Trey? He spun the laptop around so the screen faced me. I looked at the display and my breath caught in my throat. It was a complete top-to-bottom restructuring plan for Apex Legacy Holdings, LLC, right over exactly there. Trey had not just drawn a flowchart. He had coded an entirely new predictive algorithm designed specifically for my medical supply distribution network. I pulled the corporate shipping manifests from the public server last month, Trey explained, his voice steady and highly professional. I analyzed our rural delivery routes. You built this company by serving the small county clinics that the massive distributors ignored. But our fuel costs and driver overtime have skyrocketed over the last 3 years. The current routing software is horribly outdated. He tapped the keyboard, bringing up a dynamic map of Georgia looking completely perfectly covered in interconnected blue and red lines. I coded a new logistics algorithm. Trey continued pointing to the screen. It uses real-time traffic data, predictive weather models, and clinic inventory histories to automate the delivery schedules. If we implement this system, we can consolidate the rural routes. We cut fuel consumption by 12% and reduce driver overtime by 15% without missing a single delivery window. It saves the company roughly $2 million annually in operational overhead alone. I stared at the screen, entirely, completely, totally stunned. He had not just looked at the raw money. He had looked at the very core of my business model. He understood the rural clinics. He understood the margins. He understood exactly what made my company valuable. But that is just the operational side, Trey said, leaning forward and pulling up a second document. This is the corporate restructuring proposal. With Dad gone, the board of directors is top-heavy. We have too many vice presidents duplicating the same tasks. If we eliminate the redundant administrative positions and reallocate that capital into expanding our automated warehousing technology, we can double our output capacity over the next 5 incredible years. I already drafted the executive transition timeline. I picked up my reading glasses and slid them onto my face. I read through the digital pages Trey had created. The proposals were not just good, they were absolutely brilliant. They were aggressive, calculated, and deeply analytical. It was the exact kind of ruthless efficiency I had used to build the company in the 1980s, updated for the modern digital age. Trey, I said, keeping my eyes on the screen, how long have you been working on this? Since the night I found the shadow loan documents on Vanessa's personal laptop, Trey answered softly. I realized that Dad was willing to throw away everything you built because he did not respect the work it took to build it. He thought wealth was a right. I know wealth is a responsibility. I watched you fight a federal legal battle to protect this company. I wanted to prove to you that I am willing to fight to make it grow. I slowly took off my reading glasses and looked at my 19-year-old grandson. I saw the sharp intelligence in his eyes. I saw the absolute loyalty that his father completely lacked. Marcus had broken my heart, but out of that heartbreak, the universe had handed me the perfect successor. Trey had proven his courage during the federal investigation. Now he was proving his corporate genius. He did not ask for a handout. He did not ask for a title. He sat down and did the grueling analytical work required to earn a seat at the table. I reached across the desk and closed his laptop. The sharp snap of the metal closing echoed in the quiet office. "Coding an algorithm is the easy part, Trey," I said, my voice completely dropping, into the commanding tone I used in the boardroom. "Numbers are logical. Technology does what you program it to do, but leading a medical supply empire requires a completely different set of skills. You have to know how to negotiate with hospital executives who look down on you. You have to know how to walk into a room full of hostile investors and command absolute respect. You have to learn how to identify a predator hiding behind a friendly smile." Trey did not flinch. He sat perfectly straight and met my gaze. "I am ready to learn. Grandma, completely, absolutely." The morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my kitchen in the Buckhead mansion, illuminating the white marble countertops. It was a Tuesday, and the house was incredibly quiet. For the first time in over 2 years, the silence did not feel heavy or tense. It felt like peace. I stood at the massive kitchen island, mixing a fresh pitcher of my signature sweet tea. The recipe belonged to my grandmother, who taught me how to steep the black tea leaves just long enough to extract the robust flavor without any bitterness before stirring in the raw cane sugar and fresh lemon slices. I poured myself a tall glass and watched the condensation form on the outside of the crystal. I had spent the last month working closely with Trey at the medical supply warehouse, implementing his brilliant new logistics algorithm. The transition was grueling but exhilarating. My company was thriving, and my grandson was proving every single day that he possessed the sharp analytical mind necessary to protect our family legacy. The sound of the heavy brass mail slot opening and closing echoed from the front foyer. The daily mail delivery had arrived. I set my glass down on the marble island and walked out of the kitchen. My heels clicked softly against the hardwood floors. I reached the front door and bent down to gather the small stack of envelopes resting on the entryway rug. Most of it was standard corporate correspondence, charity gala invitations, and banking statements. But one envelope caught my eye immediately. It was standard cheap white paper. It did not have a typed return address. It had a handwritten one. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was the same messy, slanted print I had spent years deciphering on grade school homework assignments and teenage apology notes. It was Marcus. My breath caught for a moment. The return address belonged to an inexpensive extended-stay motel on the edge of Atlanta. He had not gone to prison with Vanessa and Roxanne. Instead, he had walked out of the courthouse with a ruined reputation, a collapsing startup, devastated credit, and no access to the family wealth he had assumed would always protect him. The address told me how far his life had fallen. I walked back into the kitchen carrying the envelope, as if it were fragile glass. I sat at the island and stared at it. I had not spoken to my son since the night of the federal raid. I had blocked his calls and instructed my legal team not to pass along requests for money or favors. I had severed the connection. Yet a handwritten letter had found its way through the one channel I had not closed. I reached into the kitchen drawer and pulled out a silver letter opener. I slid the blade under the flap of the envelope and sliced it open. I unfolded the 2 pages of lined notebook paper. The handwriting was frantic and desperate. "Mother," the letter began, "I know you hate me. I know you think I am a monster for what I let Vanessa do. But I am begging you to read this. My business is gone. My credit is destroyed. I am living out of a motel room while creditors call every day. People who used to take my calls will not even answer me now. I made a terrible mistake, but I am still your son." I read the words and felt a sharp pang of maternal sorrow. A mother's first instinct does not vanish simply because her child grows into a man capable of betrayal. For a moment, I pictured Marcus alone in that small motel room, surrounded by unpaid bills and the wreckage of the life I had made too easy for him. I remembered the little boy who used to hold my hand in crowded grocery stores, and my heart ached. But then I kept reading. Then the letter turned to what he really wanted. His startup had collapsed, his bank accounts were nearly empty, and his credit had been wrecked by the scandal. He said he was facing bankruptcy and could not qualify for a decent apartment or another business loan. He wanted me to wire enough money to settle his most urgent debts, pay his legal bills, and give him a fresh start. "You have millions," he wrote. "You can fix this for me. If you help me one last time, I will work for the company and do whatever you ask. Please do not leave me with nothing." Marcus was not truly apologizing for what he had done to me. He was not dwelling on the fact that he had signed a petition meant to strip away my civil rights, or that he had helped Vanessa pursue a fraudulent claim against my property. He was focused on the consequences that had finally reached him. His comfort was gone, his status was gone, and now he wanted my fortune to become the safety net beneath him again. I placed the letter on the marble countertop. Marcus had spent his entire life assuming I would fix whatever he broke. When he crashed his first car, I replaced it. When he failed out of his first college program, I paid tuition at another university. I had padded his existence with so much financial security that he never learned to accept a permanent consequence. That pattern had helped create the entitlement now staring back at me from the page. If I paid his creditors, covered his legal bills, or financed another apartment, I would be validating the same delusion. I would be telling him that even after he helped another person declare me incompetent and reach for my assets, his mother's money would still arrive whenever he became frightened enough to ask. I refused to return to the dynamic that had made his betrayal possible. In business, when an investment threatens to drain everything around it, you stop feeding it. You close the ledger and move forward. Marcus was my son, not a line item, and that truth made the decision painful. But he had bankrupted my trust completely, and trust was the one asset no amount of money could restore for him. I stood up and walked over to the home office. I opened the top drawer of my mahogany desk and pulled out a thick red permanent marker. I walked back into the kitchen and picked up the white envelope. I carefully folded the lined notebook paper and slid it right back inside. I sealed the flap shut with a piece of clear tape, ensuring the contents were perfectly secured. I uncapped the red marker and pressed the felt tip to the front of the envelope, directly above the motel return address. I wrote 3 words in large, bold, capital letters: "Return to sender." I drew a heavy red line through my own name and the Buckhead mansion address. I did not write a reply. I did not explain myself again or offer another angry reprimand. Returning the letter without an answer was enough. Marcus had spent years treating access to me as permanent, and I was finally making clear that access was not an inheritance. I was refusing to set myself on fire to keep my betrayers warm. I carried the envelope to the front foyer, stepped onto the porch, and placed it in the outgoing mail slot. The Atlanta air was warm with the scent of magnolias. The postal worker would send it back to the motel address Marcus had written in the corner. He would receive his own request with no check, no promise, and no rescue inside. The bank of his mother was closed. I stood on the porch and watched the mailbox lid settle shut. The decision did not erase the history between us, but it ended the negotiation I had been having with myself. Marcus would have to rebuild his life with the tools available to any grown man: work, humility, patience, and accountability. I would not purchase those lessons for him. When I returned to the kitchen, my phone displayed a reminder for the Foundation Gala meeting. I picked it up, finished my tea, and turned my attention toward the people who deserved my time. I walked back inside and locked the front door. The metallic click of the deadbolt sliding into place was incredibly satisfying. I returned to the kitchen and picked up my glass of sweet tea. I took a long, refreshing drink. The tea was perfectly balanced, just the right amount of sweetness and strength. I looked at the spotless marble island and the gleaming stainless steel appliances. The Buckhead mansion finally felt like mine again. It took 3 full months of renovations to completely erase the sterile, cold aesthetic Vanessa had infected my home with. She loved everything to look like an operating room. Pale gray walls, white leather furniture that nobody was allowed to sit on, and sharp metallic accents that made the rooms feel entirely devoid of human warmth. I hired a local design firm to rip out every single piece of her pretentious decor. I replaced the freezing marble floors with rich, warm walnut wood. I hung vibrant tapestries and original paintings by incredibly talented local African American artists. I brought color and life back into the massive spaces. The air no longer smelled of the synthetic vanilla perfume Vanessa used to spray everywhere. Now, the mansion smelled of fresh magnolias, roasting spices, and beeswax polish. It smelled like a real home. Tonight, the mansion was going to serve its true purpose. I stood at the top of the grand sweeping staircase, looking down at the magnificent ballroom. The last time I stood in this exact spot, I was watching federal agents drag my treacherous daughter-in-law out the front doors in steel handcuffs. The memory still brought a sharp, satisfying smile to my face. But tonight was not about destruction. Tonight was about building something new. I was hosting the inaugural charity gala for the Apex Legacy Foundation. It was a philanthropic initiative I created to provide massive startup grants and intense mentorship to young African American women entering the business and medical technology sectors. I wanted to take the immense wealth I had built over 40 years and plant it directly back into my community. I wanted to water the seeds of the next generation. The ballroom was transformed. Instead of the gaudy, towering white orchids Vanessa had rented with stolen money, the room was decorated with elegant, understated arrangements of deep red roses and gold accents. A jazz quartet played softly in the corner, filling the space with a rich, soulful melody. The catering staff circulated with trays of exquisite Southern fusion appetizers. The front doors opened and the guests began to arrive. This was not the crowd of superficial socialites and corrupt politicians Vanessa had invited to stroke her massive ego. These were real people of substance. I saw hospital administrators, tech entrepreneurs, community leaders, and brilliant young college students carrying business plans in their portfolios. They were women who had fought for every single inch of ground they stood on. They were women who understood exactly what it meant to be underestimated and overlooked. I smoothed the skirt of my tailored navy blue evening gown and walked down the stairs to greet my guests. The moment my heels touched the ballroom floor, the energy in the room shifted entirely. People did not look at me with the fake, polite smiles they reserve for a walking checkbook. They looked at me with genuine, absolute respect. They saw a trailblazer. They saw a woman who had shattered glass ceilings in the 1980s and built an empire that stood the test of time. "Gloria, you look absolutely breathtaking," a voice called out. I turned and smiled warmly. It was Denise, a prominent local judge who had helped me navigate some of the early legal hurdles of setting up my foundation. She wrapped me in a genuine, tight embrace. "The work you are doing here tonight is going to change so many lives, Gloria," Denise said, stepping back to look around the crowded room. "You have turned this beautiful house into a beacon of hope for so many young women." "Thank you, Denise," I replied, feeling a deep swell of pride in my chest. I just decided it was time to stop letting my resources gather dust in banking accounts. Wealth is only useful if you use it to build doors for other people to walk through. "Grandma," a familiar voice called out over the jazz music. I turned and saw Trey walking toward me. He was wearing a sharp, tailored suit that fit him perfectly. He held a tablet in one hand and was currently managing the silent auction we were running to raise additional funds. He looked incredibly mature, stepping effortlessly into his new role as the Vice President of Operations for Apex Legacy Holdings. "Everything is running perfectly," Grandma Trey reported, tapping the screen of his tablet. "The silent auction has already exceeded our primary fundraising goal by 30%. The guests are incredibly generous tonight. That is because they believe in the mission, Trey," I said proudly, "and they believe in the team running it. You have done an outstanding job organizing the digital infrastructure for this event." Trey smiled, a bright, genuine smile that reached all the way to his eyes. "I had a very good teacher," he replied softly. He offered me his arm, and I took it gladly. We walked together toward the center of the ballroom. The jazz quartet finished their song and gracefully stepped away from the microphones. It was time for the keynote address. I had not asked a politician or a celebrity to speak tonight. I had asked one of the first recipients of the Apex Legacy Foundation grant to share her story. A young woman named Maya stepped up to the microphone. She was 25 years old and the founder of a local telehealth startup. She looked out at the crowd of 300 people and took a deep, steadying breath. "Good evening, everyone," Maya began, her voice ringing clearly across the silent ballroom. "A year ago, I was sitting in my tiny apartment staring at a business plan that I thought would never see the light of day. I had been rejected by 12 different venture capital firms. They told me my idea was too ambitious. They told me I lacked the corporate backing to succeed." Maya turned her head and looked directly at me standing in the center of the crowd with Trey. "Then I met Gloria Morrison." Maya continued, her voice filling with deep emotion. "Gloria did not look at my age or my background. She looked at my data. She looked at my work ethic. She handed me a check, but more importantly, she handed me her time. She sat with me for hours, tearing my business plan apart and teaching me how to rebuild it so it was completely bulletproof. She taught me how to walk into a boardroom and demand what I was worth." The crowd broke into a spontaneous round of applause. I felt a sudden, unexpected lump form in my throat. "We are here tonight to celebrate the launch of this foundation," Maya said, raising her voice over the clapping. "But we are really here to celebrate a woman who refuses to let the ladder be pulled up behind her. Gloria, you are not just an investor to us. You are a mentor, a protector, and a true matriarch to this entire community of women." The entire ballroom erupted into a standing ovation. 300 people turned to face me, clapping and cheering with absolute unbridled enthusiasm. I stood there holding my grandson's arm, completely overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the love in that room. Looking around this vibrant, beautiful ballroom, I finally understood the truth. Shedding toxic family members does not leave you isolated. It does not leave you lonely or abandoned. It clears the poisonous weeds from your garden so the healthy roots actually have room to grow. By cutting Marcus and his predatory wife out of my life, I had created massive, wide open space. I filled that space with people who valued integrity over entitlement. I filled it with a grandson who stood between me and a violent attacker without a second thought. I filled it with brilliant young women who looked at my 40 years of hard work and saw a roadmap to their own success. Blood is nothing but a biological accident. Loyalty, respect, and mutual protection are deliberate choices. The people standing in this room, clapping for me, had chosen to respect my legacy. They were my chosen family. I let go of Trey's arm and stepped forward to acknowledge the applause. I raised my hand, giving the crowd a graceful, appreciative wave. I felt a profound, unshakable sense of peace settle deeply into my bones. The Buckhead mansion was no longer a battleground. It was a fortress of empowerment. The applause slowly died down, and the jazz quartet began to play a lively, upbeat tune. The catering staff brought out silver trays lined with crystal glasses filled with sparkling cider and premium champagne. The celebration resumed with even more joyous energy than before. Trey leaned down to whisper in my ear over the music. "You built something amazing here, Grandma. Not just the company, but all of this." He gestured around the room. "We built it, Trey," I corrected him, smiling warmly. "And we are going to keep building it for a very long time." The charity gala was still buzzing with vibrant energy downstairs, but I needed a moment to myself. I walked away from the grand ballroom and stepped out onto the expansive wraparound balcony of the Buckhead mansion. The heavy glass doors closed behind me, muting the upbeat jazz music and the lively chatter of my guests. The very thick, humid Atlanta air wrapped around my shoulders like a warm, familiar blanket. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in deep shades of crushed violet and burnt orange. I walked over to the polished stone balustrade and rested my hands on the cool surface. A feeling of absolute, profound stillness settled into my chest. For the first time in my 68 years, I felt entirely unburdened. I took a deep, cleansing breath and let the quiet evening wash over me. I thought about the incredible journey of the past 6 months. It felt like a lifetime ago that I sat at my kitchen island drinking sweet tea while my greedy daughter-in-law paced across the marble floor, screaming into her phone. I remembered the sheer audacity in her voice when she demanded the deed to this very house. I remembered the cold, terrifying realization that my own son, Marcus, was perfectly willing to help her steal my entire life savings and strip away my civil rights. They had plotted my destruction under my own roof. They looked at me and saw an easy mark. They saw a woman with silver hair who enjoyed gardening and baking peach cobbler on Sunday afternoons. They fell for the greatest and most dangerous misconception in modern society. People consistently underestimate older women. When a woman reaches a certain age, society strips away her individual identity and replaces it with a harmless, invisible caricature. They assume our minds have grown dull. They assume our edges have softened. They believe that because we no longer shout or demand attention, we have somehow forgotten how to fight. Vanessa and Roxanne bought into that foolish stereotype completely. They thought my silence was compliance. They thought my polite smiles were a sign of naive ignorance. They had absolutely no idea what it took for a black woman to build a $40 million medical supply empire in the 1980s. They did not know about the decades of grueling survival. When I started my company, I was selling bandages from the trunk of a used car. I had to walk into boardrooms filled with wealthy, aggressive men who did not want me there. I had to sit across the negotiation table from ruthless hospital administrators who tried every single trick in the book to bankrupt my business before it even got off the ground. I faced down corporate sharks who would have eaten Vanessa and Roxanne alive for breakfast. I survived price wars, hostile takeover attempts, and vicious smear campaigns. I built my fortress brick by brick, dollar by dollar, contract by contract. Every single gray hair on my head was earned in the trenches of corporate warfare. My business acumen was not something I read about in a book. It was forged in fire. I learned how to read the hidden clauses in complex legal documents because missing a single detail meant losing everything. I learned how to spot a liar by the subtle shift in their posture and the nervous cadence of their voice. I learned how to smile warmly at an enemy while silently locking the doors and trapping them inside the room. Vanessa thought she was a criminal mastermind because she knew how to order animal tranquilizers from an unregulated overseas pharmacy and buy a fake notary stamp on the dark web. She thought she was playing chess, but she was playing a simple game against a grandmaster who had already predicted her final 10 moves. I looked down at my hands resting on the stone balustrade. These hands had worked tirelessly for 4 decades to create generational wealth. I had desperately wanted to pass that wealth down to my son. I thought my ultimate duty as a mother was to give Marcus the soft, comfortable life I never had. I paid for his expensive education. I bought him luxury cars. I shielded him from the harsh, punishing realities of the world. Standing here now under the fading light of the Georgia sky, I realized that shielding him was the greatest disservice I could have ever done to him. By removing the struggle, I removed his ability to develop a spine. I created a man who felt entitled to the fruits of my labor without ever understanding the sweat required to harvest them. Marcus allowed his wife to forge his name and pledge his retirement accounts to illegal shadow lenders because he lacked the courage to confront her financial recklessness. He allowed her to attempt to chemically sedate me because he was too cowardly to face his own impending bankruptcy. He signed that emergency power of attorney petition, declaring me mentally incompetent because he was a parasite looking for a quick and easy payout. Cutting him out of my life was the most painful decision I ever had to make, but it was also the most vital. You cannot save a drowning man who is actively trying to pull you under the water with him. You have to let go of the rope and let him sink entirely down. Marcus was now sitting in a cheap motel with a ruined reputation, a destroyed credit score, and a mountain of legal bills. He was watching his wife serve a 15-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. He was completely cut off from the massive corporate trust fund he thought he was going to inherit. He had lost his mother, his mansion, and his entire future. The pain of that maternal severance used to ache, but the ache was entirely gone now. It was replaced by the clean, sterile logic of a chief executive officer who had successfully liquidated a highly toxic liability. I had excised the tumor from my family tree before it could poison the healthy branches. The healthy branches were currently thriving. I turned my head and looked back through the glass doors. I could see Trey standing near the catering tables, laughing with a group of young tech entrepreneurs. He looked so much like his father, but he possessed a core of absolute solid iron that Marcus never had. Trey did not ask for a corner office or a massive salary. He asked for the opportunity to learn. He spent the last month sitting beside me at the medical supply warehouse, absorbing every single lesson I offered. He was brilliant, dedicated, and fiercely loyal. When Vanessa locked him out of the internet, he did not complain. He bypassed her security and uncovered the massive federal conspiracy that saved my life. When Marcus stood in that ruined ballroom begging for a bailout, Trey did not flinch or offer him a single word of comfort. He recognized the betrayal for exactly what it was. Trey was the true heir to the Apex Legacy Holdings empire. I was going to spend the next several years transferring every ounce of my business knowledge into his sharp, capable mind. I was going to teach him how to read a balance sheet, how to negotiate a federal contract, and how to absolutely destroy anyone who ever tried to steal his legacy. I turned back to face the horizon. The sun had completely set now, and the sky was a canvas of deep indigo, dotted with the first bright stars of the evening. The warm breeze rustled the leaves of the towering oak trees lining the property. I took a deep breath of the fragrant air. I had secured my peace of mind. I had protected my enormous life work. The mansion was no longer just a building filled with expensive furniture. It was a testament to my ultimate survival. The women laughing and networking inside the ballroom were a testament to my purpose. I had successfully redirected my immense wealth away from ungrateful parasites and toward the brilliant minds of the next generation. There is a profound, unshakable power that comes from knowing exactly who you are and exactly what you are worth. I smiled and stepped back inside my beautiful home. I stepped back into my beautiful home, closing the heavy glass doors securely behind me, and walked slowly toward the center of my living room. I want to take a brief moment right now to look directly at all of you watching and listening to my story. Cutting my son out of my life permanently was absolutely the hardest thing I have ever done. The emotional toll of realizing the boy I raised was willing to destroy me for a house was a heavy burden to carry. There were long, dark nights I stayed awake, wondering where I went wrong. But I learned a very hard truth. You cannot ever let the guilt of a mother blind the survival instincts of a woman who successfully built her own massive empire. The triumph of justice far outweighed the pain of that betrayal. I refused to let my $40 million legacy be dismantled by a greedy daughter-in-law and a cowardly son. They thought my age made me a target, but it actually made me their worst nightmare. I used the very laws they tried to break to build their prison cells. Today, Vanessa and Roxanne are serving 15 years in federal prison for wire fraud and elder abuse. Marcus is bankrupt and completely cut off from the wealth he felt so incredibly entitled to possess. They lost everything because they underestimated the woman who paid for everything. But this story is not just about the people I lost. It is about the person I found. My grandson Trey proved that loyalty and brilliance still exist in my bloodline. He stood by my side during the darkest moments and used his absolute genius to help me secure our future. That is why I am so incredibly proud to announce that Trey is no longer just a college sophomore bypassing routers in his bedroom. Last week, I officially named him the Vice President of Apex Legacy Holdings, LLC. He is currently sitting in a corner office, managing our logistics technology and proving every single day that he is the rightful heir to the throne I built. We are taking the medical supply industry by storm together. To anyone out there watching who is dealing with toxic family members or entitled relatives who view you as a walking bank account, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not ever set yourself on fire to keep your betrayers warm. Age is not a weakness. It is your absolute greatest weapon. You have survived decades of hardship, and you have earned the right to enjoy the fruits of your labor in total peace. If someone tries to take your crown, you do not cry and you do not surrender. You stand up tall, you lock down your assets, and you show them exactly why you are the one sitting at the head of the table. It is finally time for me to get back to running my company and planning our next massive charity gala for our community. I have a large empire to expand and a brilliant grandson to actively mentor. Please let me know down in the comments below if you would have done the exact same thing to Marcus and Vanessa. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you strongly believe in fighting back and fiercely protecting your hard-earned legacy at all costs. I will read every single comment you leave for me. Never let anyone underestimate your power. Thank you for listening to my story today. Have a beautiful and truly blessed evening.